Hey, welcome here, Esoteric Dubidism, back with a topic somewhat due to popular demand, which is speed reading, something extremely important. I've been advising and advocating this really my whole life. As I think in sixth or seventh grade, I had a public school teacher. I think you remember Mr. McQueen here in Southfield, Michigan, who had Bill Cosby actually has a course on speed reading, the famous or infamous Bill Cosby. So it's interesting that that Bill Cosby, now whoever had this system of speed reading. I'll put a link on that to anyone who's interested. But I learned that as a young kid. I've been reading at least over 500 words a minute since my bar mitzvah at 13. I think I could read over 1,000 words a minute. There's a lot to the technique. We're going to go over some of the techniques and then the scientific understanding of what's actually going on. We're going to touch on memory and cognition. And okay, Mr. Earl, I'm glad you have such a big library. My father has such a similar library. My library is a few thousand books. I was a librarian at a large synagogue that had thousands and thousands of Hebrew books over thousands of years. I'm a big reader. Speed reading is extremely important. I've went over this stuff at multiple points in my life, and I was just looking back because people were questioning me about it the other night, and I'm constantly telling people about these techniques, and I live by this. I advocate it, and to some extent, I'd like to change the form of my channel. Create this intellectual community. Obviously, you're going to see me on different channels debating different topics: Jewish question, multiculturalism, maybe evolution. Consciousness is going to be somewhat related to what we're talking about, because reality is science doesn't truly understand what happens when we read, how we process information. Although there's a lot of evidence, saying that we're going to be talking about eye movement in the most recent studies on cognition. Although to me, you have to understand this as a conscious function of the soul, possibly like Platonic ideas, where the ideas exist in some spiritual realm, and really we're tapping into it. And so today I'll be focusing more on the scientific studies. We're going to start with just technique. I've found some PowerPoints, and to people who've already done this, a lot of this will be a review. If you want to join my chat and talk with me over this, if you have some expertise on this, Roy, I'd appreciate someone to help me through. And some of this is a learning lab, because largely what I'm doing is I'm just doing these study sessions online, and they're largely for myself, but I'm putting it out there to try to create this intellectual forum and gather together people who are interested in these common ideas and want to learn about these things, and increase intellectual content of these channels and debates I'm having, and research. A lot of these things I've been researching for my whole adult life, and time is limited. And so if we could try to create this intellectual community, speed reading will be one of the most essential skills, and it's going to be related to memory also. That you'll see that speed reading, at a certain point, the limits of speed reading are the limits of memory. So with that, let me just check my sound. I'm going to hop into screen share mode, and we'll jump right in. And so let me make sure this screen share mode is working. And then I got some PowerPoints, and I got some scientific studies, and you'll actually be able to see my speed reading techniques live, because in reality, I will be going through hundreds of pages of literature, and we'll see some of these techniques that we're going to discuss. So let's jump right in. I found some few PowerPoints, and we're going to see some of this idea of, through these streams, what I'm doing for myself is a mental exercise with memory and review. And a lot of these times, the more important ideas like skimming, where you could gather a lot of information, but the more important information, memory recall, has to be reviewed and went over multiple times. And that's part of this technique here in the video that I'll be using by going over a lot of data multiple times. So I have a few basic things. Let's just jump right in. So, I just found different resources online, PowerPoints to start with, and then we're going to go into some scientific studies to show what's the actual science of it. Some people claim that speed reading is actually a fraud, and we'll get into this. Okay, improve your reading rate and maximize your comprehension. Why? Obvious. You have to read more and more. There's so much information out there. Reading too slowly could actually reduce your comprehension. It doesn't stimulate your brain enough, decreases interest in the subject, and we have more capacity than people are using. If you look at it from neurons in the brain, we have 1 trillion brain cells, and the visual capacity of taking a full page of text in 1/20th of a second. There would be scientific method that really you could take in a whole page of text in 1/20th of a second that even a below intelligence person could actually read quite fast. And you're reading 500 words plus a minute is attainable by even below average intelligence people. So what causes people to read slowly? Limited perceptual span or excessive fixation, word by word reading, pointing, regression, needless or unconscious reading, habitual and signal lack of concentration, vocalization, moving your lips while reading, subvocalization, talking to yourself in your head as you read silently, physical habits, tapping the foot, pencil, distractions, watching TV, eating interruptions, lack of reading practice. So we're going to get into a meditative aspect, and I mentioned that the other day on my post-JF debate stream about silencing the voice in your head. But basically, your eye is just using your eye to take in the sensory input of the reading is the fastest method to do it. But people will have a tendency to even move their lips outside and the voice inside our head to repeat what we're reading. And this actually slows the process down. And studies have shown that that's unnecessary, and you can intake the information purely with the visual aspect, and that's the quickest way to do it. Although for terms of memory and comprehension, there is a benefit to using the voice inside your head, or to even using your lips to repeat what you're saying. Like for learning Torah, the sages said that you should say the words out loud with your lips. So if it's important, and we'll get more into those techniques, and people who've done martial arts and meditation and have really became in tune with their senses and their different senses, and will think about the value of their different senses for different information, and could separate these different senses and what are we really trying to accomplish in terms of getting information in, and to separate the ear, the internal voice, and the eyes. So, a lot of this is basic. Increase your reading rate and comprehension. Set yourself up for success. Read in a quiet, distraction-free environment. Don't read in bed. I read in bed also, and I speed read in bed. But when you really want to ascertain information, it should be in a serious setting. Read actively. Set up your purpose for reading and self-monitor. Increase your eye span chunking. So we're going to get into these concepts of eye movement, cognition, and chunking, which will be very important. Average reading rates. Your average adult only reads 250 words per minute with 70% comprehensions. There are different studies on this. A college student, sorry, stumbling my words, maybe trying to speak too fast. But there's a lot of information to get through. So your average college student maybe reads about 300 words per minute. Slow readers, 150 words per minute or less. 250 words per minute, and comprehension even less. And you will look at how fast someone could actually speak. Conversational speech might be 100 to 200 words a minute. So we're going to have these different types of reading: scanning, skimming, light reading, word by word, study reading. And relatively, when we read, we'll switch between these different techniques, and they'll be part of speed reading. And for comprehension, when we talk about comprehension, that speed reading uses a variety of these topics, a variety of these strategies, or at different times you might speed read at certain things, or newspapers or light information. And then if you're reading for pleasure, you might read very slowly, or certain stuff that requires lots of comprehension, that you have to vary your strategy. But to understand these different strategies is important. And there'll be this concept, the SQ4R method, that will be survey, question, read, and write. So survey, there's just to look at, read something, comprehend it. It's easier if you're just reading something and you jump right in. It's actually going to be worse for you. So the first best thing to do is to survey what you're going to be reading, skim the title, subheadings, graphics, captions, boldface terms, first one or two paragraphs, summary. Ask yourself, what do I already know about these topics? Bring your background knowledge and your prior experience, and then take no more than 5 minutes per an average chapter. And you'll actually see me doing this when we get to some of these longer studies that are like 20, 50 pages. And I'll use these exact techniques that we're mentioning here. I've been doing this, for tens of years. Thank God I learned this strategy in my youth. And your sort of frame for, like, when we talk about memory, framing this information, how does it get into our brain, in our head? How do we store it and recall it? We have to have a frame. Why are we acquiring this information? Where does it fit in with what we already know? And for maybe future esoteric duvidisms and understanding what's actually going on in consciousness, this will be complicated for whether you understand this as a function of the brain or actual soul function. But so you question how, why, what, when, where, who. That what is this information we're acquiring and why are we acquiring it? So read quickly and selectively. Remember what you are searching for, an answer to your question. Read only one section or a few paragraphs, depending on the difficulty of the text. Recite answers to your question aloud. So, this idea of skimming, speed reading, will be that there's only small elements of the text that are very relevant to the knowledge we want to acquire, and therefore we could skim parts of it and slow down and concentrate on other parts more that will allow us to get through the text quicker. And the write, which will be note taking, and there'll be different methods, and we will talk about memory. So your review, obviously, you want to memorize something, you want to know something well. Speed reading at once will not be enough. You'll have to review it constantly. And I actually have studies later that will get into the most optimal ways for reviewing something, the tests that show how quickly we forget things and how often you should pace your reviewing, and that will be very interesting. And as I said, eliminate subvocalizations. The inner voice experienced as a slight movement in the tongue or throat region slows down reading to about 250 words per minute, the speed of normal speech. And there's this concept of eye fixation, word for word reading, where your eye is looking at word for word, and we'll get more into that. But he's saying if you're subvocalizing what you're reading, that will set the upper limit to how fast you read to about 250 words per minute, which is about as fast as a person could speak. And so it might be difficult for people who've never heard of this concept to actually shut off that function of subvocalization. But that's a key part of this strategy, is to shut off that inner voice of subvocalization. And I said those who've practiced this in any form of meditation might have an upper hand in it. And if not, it could take even months of effort to be able to shut off this subvocalization function. Eye span chunking. Eye span is the number of words that you read at one time. I discussed this last night, and I'll have visuals that will help express what this chunking is. That instead of chunking letter by letter, or your eye looking at one word at a time, where you chunk 2 words, that doubles your rate. If you chunk 3 words, that triples your rate. If you could chunk 4 words, that will quadruple your rate. And I'll have visuals that will show exactly what this means, and even links to how to do that. In increasing comprehension, focus. So, you have to have the desire, the willingness, and the motivation, obviously. And there's a lot of resources on the web. So thank God I got a minion here. Shalom. I'm glad you're here, Tom. Yeah, I thought this topic would be extremely important. And, this will increase our intellectual output, and hopefully we'll be able to move on to more important topics. So I'm going to go over this from similar things from a few different angles, so that we really get this stuff. And there's a lot of resources on this, so I'm covering this relatively pretty quickly, and then we're going to get into some more complicated scientific research, which people who have been following me regularly, I'm trying to express the scientific method. And applying the scientific method to, so we'll see the most recent scientific discoveries, the best of knowledge up to today on what's actually happening when we speed read, although these techniques have gone back a long time. And it actually, a lot of it goes back in the Kabbalah and to the ancient Hebrews, and maybe I'll have some time to get into that also. And just to hear another thing, just to pound these ideas in our head, different sources of information saying the same thing will help us get the information in our head better. So as we said, it's been shown that if you're in a good setting, you sit up straight, you're in a good physical position. If you have a time limit, where you know how long you'll be reading for, there's different physical things you could do that will improve your speed reading besides the actual mental technique to to optimize your brain fitness. Like if you were taking an important test or doing something extremely important, you would probably like sit up straight and have optimal posture and cleanliness, such and such, and that will help the technique if you actually want to set aside time to research and practice this. So we're going to get, I have a lot of research on this eye movement stuff. And so you're going to see a little bit about that in when I start showing you some of these visuals, they'll start making sense. But I'll just read this so these concepts get in your head now, and then over probably a few hours this presentation is going to be, you'll hear this many times, and it'll start kicking in, and you'll commit it to memory, and you'll be able to practice it. Presumably everybody reads quite often, a few hours a day even, and so you'll have plenty of time to practice these techniques. Move your eyes faster. Our eyes look at text and fixations called saccades. Our eyes physically take in groups of words at a time, usually 3. Although we experience the illusion of continually scanning text, our eyes stop at those certain fixations. Try to increase the groups of words from 3 to 6 at a time. So you use a pencil or index card as a guide. There's certain actual techniques you could look online. There's courses, a lot of stuff online, a lot of it free or paid courses to actually structure your technique of mastering the skill. But I think just watching my presentation here and the practice over the reading that we do regularly anyways will probably be enough. You don't actually have to enroll in the course, but you could review this data, review my lecture, search out other data, follow the links I'm going to start posting. You mentioned keyword reading, where you slow down and take in certain information. It's more valuable than other information. And I'll have more visuals on what this looks like. So, notice and release ineffective habits. Notice when you make regressions and try to limit them by paying attention to the text the first time. Also notice sub-vocalization. You could read faster if you don't mentally hear the words as you read them. If you're pressed for time, skim. Read the headings, subheadings, charts, graph, and summary paragraphs. Stay flexible. Skillful readers vary their reading rate according to the nature of the material, or you can use different rates with the same material, such as skimming a chapter before you read it carefully. Explore more resources. There are speed reading classes offered, internet articles, and books about reading rates. The first rule of reading fast, just do it. You start reading, presumably anyone who's following me on YouTube is probably a reader. And I read many hours, maybe even 6 hours a day I spend reading. I assume anyone watching my channel is probably at least spending half an hour to a few hours reading a day. If you want to, choose things that are interesting to you, obviously, a lot of times you have to study and read things that are uninteresting to you, but start with things that are interesting to you. That's why I always encourage people, get educated, read, start with the things that you want to know the most about. That will give you more motivation. At least 10, 15 minutes a day. The famous Musser study of, Rabbi Salanter, who talked about Musser, which is like a path of the just that I had on my page, that we have to do these self-improvement. And the man came to him and said, I only have 10 minutes a day, Rabbi, to set aside for studying Torah. Should I learn Musser or should I learn other subjects? And the rabbi said, learn Musser, because if you spend 10 minutes a day learning Musser, you'll see that you have a lot more than 10 minutes a day to spend studying. So the same with speed reading. Start now, start with 10, 15 minutes a day. And as the self-improvement technique improves your life, you'll see that probably you actually could spend hours every day reading. So just say, check your comprehension. Increasing your reading rate while losing comprehension provides no benefit. It's okay to have only 70, 80% understanding during pushed reading. Make sure you get all the key ideas in the passage. If you have 100% comprehension, you can probably read even faster. Try to read at the same time each day. Choose a time when you are most alert and read at the same time every day for at least 15 minutes. Don't give up. This is a slow but steady process. Don't worry about fluctuations in your reading rate as long as you're seeing an overall increase in your reading rate. So thank God I got 14 people here. And we're going to get more into detail on this. So let me keep on going from some of these slideshows. So it really pounds this basic information into you. So when I go on to more in detail depth stuff, that you'll already have these basics pounded into you. And you'll see from these studies on memory and comprehension later the value of having information come at you in multiple different ways from multiple sources. So obviously reading is the quickest way to ascertain information, and visual reading where you're only using your eyes will be the absolute quickest way, and you could ascertain possibly thousands of words per minute just through using your eye technique, although comprehension will be much less. Saying the words out loud, talking, and these videos myself, saying even if no one was listening, it could be worth my while to make these videos, and I listen back to them later. I'll add a table of contents and timestamp it so I could go over it, and the multiple forms of hitting the same information really hits memory. And I have some studies on this, and maybe actually I'll have a different, if God willing, I'll have time, I'll have a different video on just improving memory techniques. So let's hit this one last time with a PowerPoint. The how to skimming, scanning, and quick reading for college. Quickly identify main ideas of a text. Skimming is 3 to 4 times faster for regular reading. Used when there is a lot of material in a short amount of time. How to skim, read the first and last paragraph, read headings, subheadings, titles, subtitles, and illustrations, read the first sentence in every paragraph. Skimming works well with dates, names, and places. Scanning, used to search for key terms when you know what you are looking for. You can go through text to find the information. Good to use when determining whether a source will have the answers you are looking for. How to scan, first look how the author organizes his information. Look for boldfaces, italics, or different size fonts. The author may also put key information in the margins of the paper. Quick reading tips, they say prepare yourself, set the length of time that you will read for, collect all your material, find a comfortable place to read, relax and focus on what you need to accomplish. And you say, I studied in yeshiva, rabbinic school. I basically read all day. And I remember top rabbinic schools, famous rabbis, and they say you should have 3 4-hour periods of study a day. One in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one at night, or at least 2. Most top rabbinic schools have a full, at least 3-hour period of straight study in the morning and in the afternoon. So you could start with a little bit of time, but if you really want to be an academic, you'll say, I'm setting aside multiple hours in the morning, multiple hours in the afternoon, and maybe even multiple hours at night for this. So, if you only start with 15 minutes, you can imagine a top scholar might be setting aside 12 hours a day for reading. So overview, look at titles, subtitles, and headings to find what information is there. Look at charts and pictures and relate to them in subtitles. Ask what you are going to get from the reading. Read during daylight hours. Studies show people are more efficient readers during the daytime. I also read at night. The Kabbalists and rabbis have said the opposite, but maybe we'll get into that at a different time. But this is more the scientific showing that I'm going to be talking about today. Person will read passages in half the time if they read in the daylight. Read during breaks in your day to allot for relaxation during the night when you need rest. Avoid distractions. Keep a notebook nearby you to write things down that come to mind so you can recall them later. Read in a place where there's nothing to distract you. Turn off the background, anything that will break your concentration. Although regularly I do keep that in the background. And as you start learning these techniques and understanding your own mind and your own learning processes, you could use your own strategies deployed based on your own understanding of your own cognition. Take a break. Studies show that reading becomes less efficient if you do not take a break to refresh your mind. 5-minute break is recommended for every hour of reading, plus standing up, circulating your blood. Although a lot of people see these streams, you see, I sit on my chair straight for 5 hours sometimes in these streams, And that's because I sit and study straight for 5 hours many times also. Do something well-defined so it does not drag on and you will not become distracted. So, the power of concentration, as I said, where I could study one subject for hours straight, in one sitting. Read often. Reading often helps build your reading skills. Reading at the same time every day turns reading into habit. Okay. Yeah, so that's space-time saying a lot of information isn't worth retaining. It exists to illustrate an idea or argument. So that's going to be the technique of switching between these different styles that we're getting down, of skimming and actually vocalizing, where you could skim 1,000 words a minute, and then you might hit more important information. You might even vocalize it with your lips, and your average speeding, your reading rate might be 500-600 words a minute because you're using a combination of techniques, and your comprehension will be very good. So let's keep on going. I have this German one that's actually long. I might save this for the end. You'll see how good my German is. I don't know if any of these people are any on my chat know German, if they even want to get on and help me walk through this. But the Schnell-Lesse Technique is extremely good, and just the visuals, graphics on this is worth going. I might save this one for the end. But if someone does know German, I don't know if Boulder is going to come on, or someone that that would be beneficial. Okay, so I have this stuff on memory also, and comprehension, because you're going to see that what limits your reading will eventually be comprehension. That once you learn these basic techniques that I talked about, the question is going to be comprehension. We're going to see in these studies that claim that speed reading is a fraud and you can't get past like 600 words a minute. And we're going to look at these studies and say that really past a certain amount, it's a matter of comprehension. There's certain techniques like having a large vocabulary, having these data structures in your head that so what these techniques that I'm showing you are essentially simple and easy, and it's going to be these other techniques of memory and comprehension that go hand in hand. So it's not directly related to speed reading, but I thought I would go over, a lot of this might even be basic stuff that we learned in high school or even to elementary school on comprehension, but it's important, so, and it's connected, so I will go over it. And I will also talk a little bit about boosting your memory because it's important. So here's a really quick one. Just the brain, learning, and memory. What's the connection between the brain, learning, and memory? Learning, modification, behavior due to increase in knowledge or skills. Memory is the ability to recall information and experiences. Learning and memory are linked. Learning relies on memory. Learning requires the storage and retrieval of information. Memory relies on learning. An individual's established knowledge base provides a structure of past learning. Incoming data attaches to the structure through association. So, understanding the connection between the brain and memory, which I discussed in my JF debate about evolution. And I hope to actually have a whole stream on memory, but you'll see that memory is interrelated to the concept of speed reading, and speed reading without comprehending and remembering it will have a little bit of use. So we're going to have to at least discuss some aspect of memory to understand speed reading. So, and for when we get to the scientific level of why the people say that speed reading is impossible, that it's related to these memory studies. So we have sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is visual, auditory, olfactory information. Transfers a short-term memory. Short-term memory stores about 7 single or chunked items for about 30 seconds without repetition. That's why speed reading is going to rely on this technique of chunking that we're going to talk about in detail. Short-term memory solves problems through reasoning process, organizing facts into a coherent essay. Long-term memory is the ability to transfer information from short to long-term memory, irrelevant to the learning process. People use attention, repetition, and association with past learning to encode information. Neurologically, encoding happens when information is repeatedly processed in the hippocampus, and this will be extremely important, and we will get into more detail about this. Critical factors in encoding: relationship of encoding data to pre-existing mental frameworks. The more associations made with established learning, the better new information is retained. Memories are not stored in a single location. There are complex neural networks spread throughout the brain's entire surface. And that's when we mention the techniques of asking questions, of reading the first paragraph, skimming through, these techniques are actually related to how memory functions. And you'll see why, it should intuitively make sense why you're looking at the boldfaces and the main themes and table of contents. These different things will actually improve memory and comprehension. So research study-based techniques: access background knowledge on a topic. This primes the brain to make association. Pose mental questions while learning. Compare and contrast new information with your current understanding. Classify and categorize facilitates retention because it involves making connections. Grasp overall concept of fit in details. Selectively highlight information. Take notes on main ideas. Outline and summarize. Retention: encoding does not ensure retention. 80% of learning is forgotten within 48 hours. And I'm going to have very nice visuals and details on these studies. Need to activate storage and retrieve processes. Review retrieval of information, temporary copies into working memory for further processing in hippocampus. REM sleep: memories are replayed and reinforced in hippocampus. Your optimum review: preliminary review, new learning peaks after 10 minutes, subsequent study at 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, and 6 months interviews. Permanent memory traces are stored where sensory inputs first occurred. They're connected in neural networks. So for things you really want to learn and understand, you have to use multiple strategies. So I'm going to have some extremely in-depth, really the most recent scientific data on this subject. So let me just show this one thing on memory to show this, and we'll go more in detail, but hopefully you could see this chart. And let me just see, are people in the chat following? Can someone give me some feedback in the chat that they're following? Let me just check my headphones that it's working. Okay, so I don't see, no one's giving me any good feedback, but I'll continue. And minimally, I'm going to rewatch this myself later, probably in 2-speed, and continue this research. But this is an extremely important chart. Maybe some of you have seen it, and you could see memorization and let me zoom out. So this bottom is days. So when you see days from 0 to 60 days, and then you see chance of remembrance. So if it's memorization, immediate recall of short-term memory, 100% recall of something within about 30 seconds. And then as it goes down, you can see if it's just something you heard once, after 2 months, you have less than a 10% chance of remembering it. And this is well studied, and hopefully people are familiar with this. But then you see that if it's something that you've repeated, so something that you heard once, and within a few days, you might have 90% chance of recall, which is like cramming. So if you're cramming for a test and you cram a bunch of that information in and you recall it for the test, but then it goes away, 2 months later, you remember almost none of it. And, maybe some of the people that cram stuff in college and university or for a certain test or certain reasons, I forgot all of it. But if you review it once within a few days, then within 2 months, there's over a 50% chance you're going to remember it. And if you reviewed something 10 days later, there's an 80% chance you're going to recall it over 2 months. If you review it a third time, a month later, there's over a 90% chance you're going to recall it. And this has been studied for years. So if you reviewed something 4 times over a spaced period where you study it once immediately, maybe review it a few hours later, then a few days later, then a week later, then a month later, then a few months later, you're likely to remember that stuff the rest of your life. So anybody who has studied this in the field, and we're actually going to go over this whole article later, but I wanted to get this now that this is extremely important. This memory technique that I'm showing, that the speed reading um, of review also, so that you could speed read things and read things possibly even thousands of words a minute. Will look like JFK, John F. Kennedy. Supposedly read 1,200 words a minute, and there's different studies, and the guy Berg that could supposedly read 20,000 words a minute. And it's possible, to skim things that the eye, as we said, the eye could take in a whole page in 1/20th of a second, so that you could go over page by page instantly. But it's the reviewing context. So if you speed read something and then you review it a few hours later, a few days later, a week later, a month later, a few months later, you're likely to recall that information for the rest of your life. So, this point of memory, I had to include it together with my speed reading, because you need to remember what you're doing. So, we're going to need to cover this basic parts of memory. And so let me just do quickly, memory boosting strategies. There's a lot of memory boosting strategies, and I might do a whole, multi-hour presentation on memory boosting strategies. And I have courses, if people follow me on Twitter, they say I just met Arthur Benjamin, the famous math magician. And I would also be interested in doing like math techniques. And a lot of these same techniques that we're learning now for speed reading will also be applied to conceptual things like chemical formulas, mathematical formulas, symbolic things that you could also learn to look at much quicker. So, we're just continuing this, pound this information in. I just showed you the memory thing, and the repetition of what I'm doing now is going to be beneficial. Might be boring to you. And if it's really boring, you tune back in later or watch this at your own leisure and skip through. But, that's why I wanted to stop and show you that memory thing, and why I'm repeating this and going through it from different sources. So preview content, set specific goals, study in a good area, vary your activity, read, take notes, recite out loud, create questions, prevent daydreaming, review what you're studying, stand up and walk for a minute, connect what you're learning with what you already know, set a time limit for studying, pace yourself, not too much in one sitting, organize assignments, study time into specific tasks. Barriers to concentration, hunger, fatigue, internal distractions, external distractions. Concentration tips, ask yourself questions. How does this relate to what I know? What is the evidence for this? What is a good example of this? Any unique points? Designate a study place for studying, good lighting, ventilated, comfortable, or not too comfortable. Divide study blocks into goal blocks. Habits of good listeners, listen between the lines, anticipate what's next, take good notes, see lectures like a chapter. There's no such thing as an uninteresting subject. There are only uninterested people. Good listeners do not interrupt with a question in the middle of an explanation, share worthless info, believe what is more important, avoid difficult explanations, find fault, dismiss content as not interesting, show impatience. So, people in the streamosphere that are following this, hopefully they'll take that into context with like the chat and, talking on this. So people that are on these streams with me that want to increase their intelligence and intellectual output, they'll take these considerations. Listening skills, screen out distractions, background noise, language mistakes, accents, speaker habits, irrelevant info, daydreaming. For example, if you're in university and you learn accents, like Indian, Chinese, Korean, European, whatever accents, eventually you could learn how to understand an accent and it doesn't bother you. And the person having accent has basically no effect on your learning. Organize info into main ideas and supporting details. Avoid hasty judgments. Remain neutral, not emotional. Prune, maintain alertness, eye contact with speaker. Ask, what is it for me? Find areas of interest. List for central ideas, not facts. Exercise mind with difficult material. So listen actively, summarize, analyze, predict, mentally review what has been previously said, compare lecture to text, apply your own expertise, select most important, ignore. Auditory learners, you remember best by listening and taking, using notes, review notes and reading them out loud. Study partners, teaching others, consider taping class sessions. So obviously, if you're listening to me on YouTube, chances are you're an auditory learner, and really it's an all of the above strategy. That things you really want to master, you should use an all of the above strategy of speaking it, listening to it, explaining it to others, reading it. So all visual, all of the above strategy is best. Tactile kinesthetic learners. There's different systems, and you will skip through this. So you have to choose the techniques that help you. So we'll look into possibly some of these memorization techniques. But when you're trying to remember and comprehend what you're reading, some will be associate with personal memories of the meaning with context, visualize, form mental images, apply, repeat, rhymes, abbreviation, acrostics, acronyms, words to help you remember terms such as very active your repetition. Sometimes just repeating something a few times, even if you're skimming through something or remember something, you might actively stop and repeat something multiple times within your speed reading. Study right before sleeping, multiple review. Simple memory strategy helps you to keep your cool and prevents panic from taking over. This also keeps your blood pressure down, your system oxygenated, and your mental stress protectors from overheating due to frustration. Look, overstate, visualize, engrave. The link technique, make a link or association between pairs of words to remember by visualizing in one's mind an unusual or ridiculous association between the pair. If anyone has tried these techniques, you could look more into them. I might do a separate stream just on memorization techniques. So, thanks for joining me, Esoteric. Thanks for joining me, Truth Cooperator. And maybe Truth Cooperator, if you could help me, we'll eventually go through these German slides. Or Jonathan, I have these slides in German that are actually some of the best slides out there, and that we'll go through later. That once I get some more information through. So let me get through this hand motion technique. So I mentioned through reading. Iris there's a lot of stuff online, Paul Nowak and Iris, that has a lot of material on YouTube and the web for speed reading. And this concept that we're going to talk about, hand motions when we read, it's an interesting technique that will help you read, using your finger or your eye to how you go through the page, and it will be related to chunking that we're going to get into in more detail. So, the preview, overview, the hand movements are done in the overview and the read. So when you're skimming or overviewing, you're going to use your hand movements to do this overview, and it's interesting techniques. So you have the zigzag pattern. So you use your finger to go across the page. You could either go straight down the middle, or you could make zigzag patterns, or you could move your finger line by line. For anyone who saw my post JF show, I was going through this a little bit. So you could read if you're slowing down, you could scroll your finger under the word line by line, or you could hold your finger in the middle of the page and go straight down, or you could try the zigzag strategy. And then there's also a circle hand motion. And you could try all these strategies. It's interesting, and we'll get more into that. Okay. Sarah, thanks for coming. And so I think this might be one of the most valuable streams I've done, although it'll be better for you to just watch it afterwards. I'll add a table of contents and timestamp it. So if you want to watch me live, and I'll be looking at the chat. But it'll be easier for you to just watch this later. So Let me go over this quick memorization technique, and then we'll get into maybe some chunking. I'll go back to comprehension. So memory is like a muscle. The more is used, the better it gets. Learning effective memorization strategies can help improve your efficiency at a very variety of tasks, including studying for tests, memorizing lines, memorizing a speech, remembering names, phone numbers, passwords, zip codes, recipes, complicated procedures. Possibilities are endless. Use your whole mind to remember. Mnemonics are a method for remembering information that is otherwise difficult to recall. Effective memorization begins with using as many of the best functions of the human brain as possible to code information. This includes images, colors, structure, sound, smell, taste, touch, spatial awareness, emotion, and language. Additionally, symbols can code quite complex messages quickly and effectively. I'm going to be focusing on reading, but you're going to see memory is extremely focused, extremely related to the ability to speed read, and you're going to need multiple techniques to encode this. Reading it will not be enough, and it'll be easier to speed read stuff that you've used other techniques to ingrain into your memory. So I'm not going to get too much into the brain. We will be getting into the brain studies of reading and eye movement, but your memory will save for a different time. Your repetition is one of the most basic learning techniques. Infants use it to learn to speak. Athletes use it to perfect athletic skills. If you're like martial arts, fighting, any type thing that you do, you have repetitive muscle movement that gets trained into your system. And that's why, as you've noticed, I've repeated this information multiple times already, because repetition is one of the best methods. Repetition helps the brain to form stronger connections related to that piece of information. People can only hold an average of 5 to 9 pieces of information in their short-term memory at a time. Therefore, concentrating on only a few pieces of data at a time is important. Acronyms, acrostics. Decide which portion of the content need to be memorized, and if there are logical groupings for this content, and this is going to be the chunking strategy for speed reading. Try rhyme and song. Rhythm, melody, and rhyme can aid memory. Ancient Greek stories were told by storytellers who would rely solely on their memories. The use of rhyme, rhythm, and repetition helped the storytellers remember them. And it can also be fun. Study time, use it wisely. Study skills, positive mental attitude. Okay, so I got 2 things on comprehension, another on building long-term memory. So I'm going to do one on comprehension, then I'm going to do the chunking, and then I'm going to get more into detail. So let me do one on comprehension, which should be a review. It's important. Maybe people haven't reviewed this stuff since they've been in high school. So you want improved comprehension, increase speed, develop flexible strategies, process more information in less time with greater understanding. So you have your ERR, your effective reading rate, which is your words per minute times the percent of your comprehension. So for example, if you read only 200 words a minute and comprehend only 60%, the effective reading rate's only 120 words per minute. And so, if you could read 1,000 words a minute and comprehend 70%, your effective rate will be 700 words a minute. And as we're going to see later, if you could comprehend the most important information. So if you could read, let's say, even 2,000 words a minute, but comprehend the 200 to 300 most important aspects of that. So your comprehension might only be like 15%, but if you're retaining the most important aspects of it, that's going to be one of these techniques for speed reading. And, as we said, with this chunking idea, here you have your crawl stage, letter identification, walk stage, word identification, running stage, meaning identification, and chunking. Most people don't get to chunking in school. We only get to word identification, but the same process that we learned as a baby to get to school, that the adult mind is capable of much more. And a lot of people just stop learning at some point and didn't develop these skills, even though everyone's capable of doing it. Slowing habits, single word eye fixation, subvocalization, regressions. That when your eye fixes on one word as opposed to keep on going, that slows you down. Any subvocalization where you're saying the word inside mentally slows you down. And regression where you keep on going back to the same thing will slow you down. So single word eye fixations, and we're going to be getting into this actually in the scientific studies. Subvocalizations, and there's also I'm going to have some of the top scientific studies on this. And regression, involuntary unconscious regression, eye movement, where you just keep on going back to the same idea. And there's also scientific studies on this. So regression could be useful if it's something extremely useful. You want to memorize certain facts, like a series of names or something. You might regress to repeat something multiple times. And so it has to be a voluntary conscious decision to reread, not an unconscious decision that slows you down. Chunking is extremely important. We're going to get into chunking. A lot of these scientific studies are going to be in detail about this chunking concept. And after I finish this slideshow, I'm actually going to give you a web resource to practice chunking, and you'll see very clearly what I'm talking about. Focus on meaningful group of words. There's two types: slow chunking for difficult or new material, 300 to 400 words per minute; fast chunking for easy or familiar material, 400 to 600 words per minute. And we're actually going to see that you could become much faster than this, conceivably even thousands of words per minute. Here's a simple example of chunking where you see, words. Efficient readers are able to read in groups of words. So, this sentence here, efficient readers are able to read in groups of words, so that if you're not voicing it, obviously if you're voicing it, it's not even word by word, it's syllable by syllable. But if you were just mentally without voicing it, you could read this in 3 chunks easily. Efficient readers are able to read in groups of words. And actually, I took a few years of linguistics, and I love Noam Chomsky and these concepts of universal grammar. And I would also like to go more in detail about that subject here for people who know anything about linguistics. But this slide right here is the essentials of chunking. So improves comprehension, idea input, not word input, increased speed, fewer eye stops, helps fill in gaps. Read like you think, like your eye sees. Skill summary: eliminate slowing habits of single word eye fixation, subvocalizations, regressions, involuntary or voluntary. Chunking for meaning. You have slow chunking and fast chunking. Skill building curve, where as you do it, you'll see that you're reading multiple times faster as we go through this. So if you're new to this, it might take a while to stop subvocalizations or eye fixations on words. But once you could stop subvocalizations and eye fixations and regressions, you should immediately be able to get up to 500 words per minute. And there's web resources online where you could test your reading per minute, or you could actually pull out a timer and see how fast you're reading. But if you're, God forbid, you're only reading at like 200 words per minute, like the average American, or 300 words per minute, like the average college student, once you learn to stop these subvocalizations, eye fixations, and regressions, you will immediately be able to get up to 500-600 words a minute. And we're going to be talking about peripheral visions for chunking. We're going to say how much could you, like if you look at martial arts and you could somewhat, focus on the whole room, and even, Luke Ford and his Alexander technique is somewhat this idea of peripheral visions, to take in the whole room at one time. And that will be a similar strategy for speed reading. Punctuation divides words into meaningful groups. It will be useful for chunking. Punctuation helps you chunk. So, here just simple chunking examples for people who are new to this concept of chunking, which is really the basis for speed reading and for higher thought in general too. Saying that these concepts of chunking, although we're studying for the purpose of speed reading, this will be useful for every mental activity. And I said, I believe that IQ could be increased. And if you think, you take IQ test and, representative logic and things like that, you could see that these techniques will actually improve your IQ also. And, here's an example. We're looking at speed versus comprehension. And as you increase speed, you decrease comprehension. But after skills training, not only will your speed increase, your comprehension will also increase. And that's why I'm going to repeat this stuff about memory, so that, the goal is not just to increase your speed, but we're also going to increase your comprehension. And yes, you will increase your IQ. You will become more intelligent by using these techniques. Concentration. I coach chess, and I'm always like, Cobra Kai, like focus power, concentration. It's important. Common words, for chunking. A lot of times, like learning a new language, learn the 100, 200 most common words, like SAT. Boost your vocabulary, learn common words. It'll help you read. We're going to be talking about vocabulary. Concentration improves with chunking for meaning, peripheral vision, noticing punctuation marks, hearing only key words. Chunking. Okay. So here's the final chart, putting this together. So I hope this is useful. Still got a minion here. Yeah, I mean, that's a focus power. And, relatively, you can increase your IQ. And Steer's mentioning the Torah. And I would like to actually show some of these techniques in chunking. So let me actually take it off screen share for a second and show you some of this. So this is a book form, but here, would be your Torah form. So if you see, here is the Torah, where it has no punctuation. It just has the letters with no vowels or no punctuation. And then here has the vowels and punctuation. And, so there are ancient techniques that are related to this. I have this huge book here, Chanting the Hebrew Bible. Anyone's been to synagogue service, read Moses, Chanting the Hebrew Bible by Joshua Jacobson. And it has some of these chunking strategies for the Bible, some nice charts where you look and really, if you've heard like how the Torah is read in synagogue and the it's called nusuk, but the melodic way that the Torah is read, that's actually related to chunking. And there are techniques where you could self-chunk it, like I was saying, like you could look at the visualization, but the enunciation could be divided out. So this book has examples of, it's kind of like linguistics of the chunking, that the cantillation marks in the Torah is actually a form of chunking. So there is, here's a chunked example for the cantillation marks and how they actually form structure and chunking. So this is actually very interesting. And obviously you shouldn't speed read the Torah. It's meant to be comprehended. But so that is related. So I'll re-enter screen share mode, and maybe on esoteric Duvidism there'll be more time and availability to discuss this more related to esoteric subjects, and showing that it could be that the Kabbalists and the sages had actually known quite a bit about this historically. So let's look at this chunking strategy. So I'm going to put this link in the chat for anyone who actively wants to be practicing it. Here's a web resource for chunking. And here's like the two-word hop. And we got the, so, here's your IHOP instructions. Pivot from your elbow and actually hop from one group of words to other words. Slide the page with your left hand as you go. Left-handers reverse the direction. Go as fast as you can while maintaining comprehension. Actually hop from group to group. Do at least 5 minutes of IHOP at a sitting. Wait for 2 hours between sessions. This is very flexible. practice several times a day. Do as many sessions as you can. Lay the IHOP exercises flat in front of you when you practice. It's okay to know these stories very well. Their purpose is to get you to understand groups of words at a glance. Even if they seem memorized, it's just fine. If you feel differently, make your own. When your hand moves from one group to group so fast that it blurs or seems to get in your way, move up to the next level. Once you move up, do not move back to the previous level, even if you slow down to its new level. It's okay to preview these stories the first time through. So, here's this is grouping. So here we have practice for 2 words, and say you could use your finger. And, so here you have once upon a time, there was a tree that grew so tall that it went up to the clouds. And so maybe if you're not used to speed reading, you would have had to do 2 intakes of once upon and a time. But the idea here, you can even use your finger, move your finger above it, going one to the next, like the circular technique I showed you in that slide earlier, so that you're chunking and you're taking in 2 words at a time. And so this is, practice techniques. So here is slides, and I showed you the link of things that are chunked into 2 or 3 words. Imagine a voyage across the sea. You leave a port and set sail, and so on and so on. And this is 50 pages of this. So anyone who really wants to study and practice this, I encourage that they do. So, now let's look at the 3-word IHOP, and we'll see that, this technique, if you really study this, you'll learn this chunking strategy. And it said if you chunk 2 words, you're going to read twice as fast. If you chunk 3 words as fast, 4 words as fast. And, anyone who knows basic mathematics will see that this is the basic strategy. So, same instructions. Now we have 3 words. So, this is meant to help you speed read. So these are now chunked into 3 words. So it's pretty simple. If you want to actually practice this and, show your 4 words. And, this one has 5 words, and you could make these yourself if you want. But, someone went through the trouble of making this and putting it online. And it said, so if you could get to 5-word chunking, you will be reading about 5 times as fast as you used to read. So that link to the chat is in there. And I hope, people will benefit from that. And, so that's extremely powerful technique right there. You don't have to go through that training chunking technique. So if you take a speed reading course, if you purchase one, or you actually go to a seminar that teaches speed reading, you might go through that, and that would help produce results. But if you just understand the concept, and I said, like, chances are if you're watching me, you read commonly, and so you'll be able to practice these techniques at your own leisure. But this chunking technique is probably, as I said, the first thing you have to do is stop these things that slow you down, which is the subvocalizations, the eye fixations, and regressions. So once you've learned to stop decreasing those, that will, help prevent you from reading slowly. And then this chunking strategy is the main concept that will allow you to read faster. And these different finger techniques are related to chunking. And you could look online and look more into these finger techniques, and some of the scientific studies will discuss it. But the main part, once you get rid of these detractions of subvocalization, eye fixation, and regression, keep on repeating it so we know it, we get it clear, will be this chunking strategy. And then we'll be talking about comprehension and memory. So once you get past that certain level of you understand chunking, and you start chunking more and more and more, then the key thing will be comprehension and memory. So okay, still got a minion, so let me finish these slideshows, and then I'll go over the scientific studies, the most recent scientific data on speed reading for those who want a more intellectual but you've already got the basic technique. So in the hour, I've already been going at this an hour. I've already covered basically the essentials to speed reading. So if you only saw this first hour, you've already covered the basics of speed reading. That's enough for you to move on and be a speed reader, what's already been covered. But as I said, when you want to get more into it, it's going to turn into memory and comprehension. And so I'll do these 2 more slideshows, and then I'm going to get into some of the scientific data on the subject. Comprehension. This is basic, really review. People probably took this in high school, but just a basic review because it's important. Students should be able to make personal connections with the text, understand meaning of vocabulary used, understand text structure, understand purpose for reading. Decoding, fluency, vocabulary knowledge, background knowledge, knowledge of comprehension strategies. So as I said, we've already covered the technique of speed reading. That speed reading technique is not that complicated. You've already basically learned everything. It didn't, I could probably, if I just summed it up in like one of those slideshows, the whole speed reading could be done in 5 minutes. So, once it's from there, we're talking about comprehension and memory skills. So decoding, ability to use letter-sound relations to decipher words, fluency, automaticity, appropriate reading rate, vocabulary knowledge, breadth and depth of vocabulary knowledge is important. Not just the number of words a student knows, but the depth of their understanding. Background knowledge, a conceptual framework or context into which students can fit new ideas. And we're going to see all of these things matter. And sometimes as you come across new information, you need a frame to learn it. So if you just started with, like the Talmud, for example, 1,000 years of rabbis and Talmudic sages, and you first page of Talmud, and like, who are these rabbis? When did they exist? What did they say? And if you've been learning Talmud for a long time, you probably have a pretty good conception of 1,000 years of history. When did these rabbis live? Who are they? And that would be in terms of anything where once you have the framework, it's easier to ascertain this information at a very quick rate. But creating the framework in the beginning is more slow, and you're going to have to hit these multiple methods of learning technique to do it. So, issue, limited vocabulary, background knowledge, lack of effective strategies for comprehension. So those will hold you back, and you'll have to solve it. If your vocabulary is low, you got to learn it. If you're talking about learning in a new language, if you're not a native English speaker, or you're trying to use these techniques in a different language, these things will hold you back. I mean, this is really pretty basic. You're teaching vocabulary intentionally, explicit definition, use cognates when possible, student-friendly definitions, context to teach words with multiple meanings. Use index cards, a lot of strategies. A lot of this is pretty basic. Anticipation guides, focus questions, making predictions, gist statements, the golden nugget statements, concise ideas about what might happen based on provided information from the text. A focus on vocabulary and concepts like keywords, vocabulary. Like in textbooks, a lot of times you have keywords, because if you understand the keywords, you understand a large percent of the important material, and that they'll be related to speed reading. Will be the ability to pick out the keywords, like not in a textbook where they're clearly highlighted and defined for you, but when you have to actually do that on your own. And being able to explore and activate background knowledge, provide bridge between new concepts and what is already known. So there's multiple languages. This is also worthy of study. And I'm a multilingual. I know a few hundred words and probably tens of languages. I'm pretty fluent with Hebrew and Yiddish besides English, and I know a decent amount of German, Aramaic, and I could even speak a few hundred words of French, Spanish, Sanskrit, and now relatively we're just focusing on English, but this will also be relatively to multilingualism, picking up other languages, and hopefully time allots, that'll be one of the future esoteric Duvidism streams on multilingualism. Transferable literacy skills, understanding symbolic relationships, print awareness, phonological awareness, decoding skills, concepts, cause and effect, sequencing. Strategies, we discussed this before: questioning, summarizing, graphic organizers, monitoring comprehension, using text characteristics to aid comprehension, such as heading, bold types, note-taking, cognates, words that are closely related to another word in another language. Students use cognates, important to make the process obvious, highlight the strategy. Cognate words, word walls, are created by the teacher and the class, a way to display vocabulary that they are using. So, useful techniques, and to say this is more for like teaching little kids, but just reviewing these basics of comprehensions is necessary, because speed reading is only useful if you comprehend what you're reading. Social proficiency versus academic proficiency. Social proficiency, language used in day-to-day interactions. Variety of cues facilitate comprehension. Environment, gestures, facial expressions. Academic proficiencies, language used in textbook, more abstract, higher order skills. You relate vocabulary to cognates, use cues from illustrations, reread, read aloud, keep reading logs. Descriptions, characteristics, locations, dimensions, answering and asking questions: what, when, where, who, and why. Signal words, sequence, after, before, finally, now, then, while. Restatement or synonyms, also, for example, just, as, to. Contrast and compare, like, similar, but, unlike. This will come into chunking, so a review of your basic grammar and actually studying linguistics and language structure is extremely useful to speed reading. How well you understand language will increase your ability to chunk. And as I said, I have the most in-depth research on the subject, and we will be going through some of that later. So, I mean, this is basically like elementary level, but I just want to cover this because I will be showing you some of the most recent high-level scientific publications on the subject. Highlighting. Front-loading, the process of inputting as much information as possible about a reading before the student read on their own in order to increase comprehension. Highlighting new vocabulary words, making direct connections to student background knowledge, previewing the pictures to make predictions, previewing the text to make predictions. So even this person who speed reads, and I think I could read 1,000 words per minute, I think I could demonstrate that. I think I demonstrated it on the stream yesterday, and I'll demonstrate it again, my ability to speed read. But even though if I'm learning new information, I will slowly read, and I will use these techniques of highlighting and cards because they are necessary, and you could only speed read within a paradigm of context of stuff you have a framework to understand it within. We'll call like a tea party pre-reading activity to help students anticipate what is next in the text, somewhat to what I'm doing here on YouTube. And it said, even if no one's listening to this and I'm only talking to myself, and I rewatch it later and create the table of context for my own review, but we hope to create this intellectual environment and companionship where we could work together to understand ideas. Timelines, semantic maps, story maps, Venn diagrams, cause and effect charts. That's why I'm going through these PowerPoints. Thinking maps help break down reading into concepts into manageable parts so students interact more effectively with the text. Structure and bubbles, double bubbles, other configurations to make it easy. Allows teachers to do a comprehension check in a meaningful way, encourage students to support each other in their learning. Sentence starters. Scaffolding information, the process of breaking down a concept into smaller and manageable parts that can then be introduced with support from the teacher. How-to of explicit instruction, determine the specific strategy to be taught, make sure the text facilitates the practice. I mean, I hope people read through that, deconstruct why this is useful, And, said this is part of the strategy of me showing these PowerPoints because, eventually I'm just going to be going through hundreds of pages of the most recent scientific data. So this framework right now is actually the technique. So the technique that I'm teaching you, that I'm teaching myself, that I'm reviewing for myself, is the technique that is actually being used in this video, where we're laying out the framework, and then hopefully we're going to be able to go through hundreds of pages of information. Continually modern comprehension, think, pair, share. Don't ask yes, no questions. Interacting with text. Struggling readers are often unaware that reading is an active process and they're engaging with the author about the text continually. This interaction happens through predicting, recognizing causality, questioning, clarifying, and responding to what is read. Because obviously big scholars, saying like bias, we're talking about like, okay, like I'm a Jew, I'm biased in my thinking, and you put into like the nature, who is the person giving in the information, and you have this dialogue with the author, and so that's higher level comprehension, layers of readings, and hopefully we'll get into that. Structure of text, character, setting, problem, issue, solution, outcome. Higher level understandings, cultural differences affecting comprehension, grammar, views of culture, background knowledge. So the tips we had: think, pair, share. Okay, so I'm down to 8 people. I guess, I did cover most of the information already. And as I said, this will actually be more useful in review once I add the table of contents. So I'm going to do this final one, building long-term memory. Fit brain. The fit brain, physically fit brain, hydrated, well rested, housed in a body that is active and does not overconsume food or alcohol. Emotionally fit brain is attentive, engaged, protected from undue stress. The cognitively fit brain is equipped with the conceptual tools that enhance learning, like the ones we will discuss in this presentation. Learning and memory. Acquisition of skill or knowledge. Learning. Memory is the expression of what you've acquired. Short-term memory is fleeting. The seven elements of short-term memory, and hence the power of chunking. George Miller's study, 7 plus or minus 2, which I'm sure people are aware of, and I hope to do more into that. Long-term memory, conscious decision. There's the neurobiology, the brain, the studies. Learning is more than exposure. To learn, we must be active. Is the one who does the work, who does the learning. If the brain is contemplating new concepts, it will grow new pathways. If that material is not used or practiced, however, the brain will reallocate the resources. To learn, we must retrieve and apply the new material in both the immediate and new contexts. So there's memory research, more senses leveraged in learning, the more pathways are available for retrieval. Visual input is the most likely to be recognized and recalled. Emotional arousal organizes and coordinates brain activity. Exercises and movements are correlated with brain functioning. Attention research, constant influx of stimuli, especially from social media, can cause us to get stuck in hyperattention, a state of continuous partial attention, which leaves the brain in a heightened state of stress. Initially, this boost in stress hormone is motivating and pleasurable. Over time, however, it causes impaired cognition, depression, and damage to neural circuits in the hippocampus. While hyperattention plays a role in life, particularly in flight or flight, learners also need to hone deep attention, a sustained, focused attention that allows for contemplation and reflection. Attention and learning. So I'm distracted. Suggest that we consider the following attention experience in their relationship to learning. The alerting phase, we remain sensitive to incoming stimuli from all sources. The orienting phase, we select various stimuli streams and decide on what to retain. The executive phase, we resolve conflicts and use the learning to address problems. In sum, the oriented and executive attention necessary for learning require deep or rapt attention. Attention cautions, multitasking is a myth. The brain can only attend effectively to one thing at a time. We'll see the studies, maybe we'll have time to look at that in a different time. Long interrupted study sessions will not produce long-term memory. Chunk and review every 20 minutes. Take a significant break every 2 hours. Review notes about new info before bed, which will stimulate the brain to retain rather than to get rid of it. Review again within 24 hours and regularly after that. Learning recap. Learning is expressed via long-term memory if possible. Attend to our physical, emotional, and cognitive fitness. Engage effectively. Maintain attention appropriate to learning and application. Hone habits to acquire new information via elaboration and retrieval methods. Demonstrate new skills in service to problems and other contents. So we have brain teaching, Cornell notes, concept mapping. So whole brain teaching leverages the sense and study of relevance to you. Its tenets are gestures and sounds reinforce learning in the classroom during study. Learners should teach one another, breaking up study review into small chunks using the above during class and study. Cornell method, dividing the paper into 3 pages. It was seen in the other chart. Concept mapping, organizing what you know, use visuals such as circles or squares to show relations between concepts, represent in a hierarchical fashion, general concepts at top with more specifics connected, include crosslinks, add specific examples to clarify meaning. You way to leverage learning. MBTI, meaning-oriented learners gather data concretely and process it effectively. So like the Myers-Briggs, theory-oriented learners gather data abstractly and process it reflectively. The different strategies learning for different type people. Solution-oriented learners gather data abstractly and process it actively. Actively oriented learners gather information concretely and process it actively. So use a combination of elaborative methods and retrieval methods where you push aside your study materials and practice retrieving without cues. This will give you a more accurate sense of your retention. Research has demonstrated that those whose study was accompanied by regular tests and quizzes attained 50% more 1 week after the last review. Hence, like these streams and conversations, like presentation style versus a discussion, where you have to retrieve the information, and you can see how well your brain could access the information in discussion style, or even like blood sports debate is a nice method for this. Leverage your learning strength and grow in response to your weakness. While we have preferred learning styles, they actually are dependent upon the content, and we need to employ more of our senses in learning. Chunk your study and regular refocus with questions about every 20 minutes. Review regularly and use new questions rather than participating in extending cram sessions to build retention. So retain. Each time you take notes on new information, review them before you go to sleep. Review them again within 24 hours. The initiative, this initiatives the memory building process. After that, review your notes daily, weekly as possible. Preview new material before reading. Utilize tutoring. Meet with faculties. If any material is unclear, form study groups. So hence, that's somewhat what I'm doing with my YouTube page. Because I'm not in school right now. I'm not in university. And this is largely to fulfill my own intellectual curiosity or just to be a public intellectual. And, so I'm using the techniques of YouTube and the web to do that. So retrieve, create, and review flashcards, answer practice questions, recreate materials with gestures, draw processes, systems of memory, quiz yourself and or have a classmate quiz you, attend review sessions, attend open labs, teach another the material. So summary, long-term memory of fit brain is one that is balanced physically, well-hydrated, rested, active emotionally, manages stress, and cognitively equipped with conceptual tools for enhancing learning. Elaborative learning methods and initiate learning. Retrieval methods confirm learning and signal gaps in learning. Appealing to more than one sense, especially sight, will increase learning. Using a variety of study strategies will strengthen the retrieval pathway. The more effective way to learn something is to teach it to others. Might relate to my JAF debate about multiculturalism, that people who make bad decisions might be because they are not, don't have a fit brain and aren't in a situation to process high cognitive ideas. But when people are well rested and in good health in good situations, that really anyone could do these techniques, and there are studies in that. Okay. Still got 8 people here. I don't take vitamins. I'm not sure if anyone wants to join me in the chat and actually like take a Google link. We'll talk about this a few minutes, use some of these techniques of the multiple processes before I get into, I have 8 different studies here to, at least skim through. So those were my PowerPoints. I have the one in German that's actually in depth. That hope, I got a little bit of German, but this is very good, this German one. So if someone knows German and wants to help me out with that, but I might get back to that later. I'm drinking tangerine juice now. A good diet. I recommend vegetarianism. Hopefully, I might stream at a different point about vegetarianism. But okay, doesn't look like anyone. Esoteric, you seem the only one actively in the chat. And I don't know if I've never seen you join actively a chat with Google Hangouts. But I said the strategy to actually discuss this, all of the above strategy, is very useful. So I'm going to go straight into some of these studies. I'll put this in the link. Here is a book by Mark Seidenberg, who wrote this book, Language at the Speed of Sight. So research professor, Department of Psychology, University of Wisconsin, cognitive scientist, neuropsychologist, psycholinguistics, studied language, reading, and dyslexia since the disco era. Reading research addresses the nature of skilled reading, how children learn to read, dyslexia, and the brain basis of reading. Uses the tools of modern cognitive neuroscience, behavior experiments, computation models, and neuroimaging. His language research addresses what people know when they know a language, how this knowledge is represented in the brain, and how it is acquired. And he has this book, Language at the Speed of Sight, How We Read, Why So Many Can't, and What Could Be Done About It. So it's an interesting book where, you want to know the science behind what's happening. I didn't order this book, but just you're recommended of techniques, and so esoteric, you're the only one here in the chat. You said all of the above strategy, and sometimes trying to explain things to people less intelligent than you is a very good method of committing things to long-term memory and understanding it better. And you see that if you can't explain it to an average intelligent person, that might be a sign that you really don't understand it yourself. So I said all of the above strategy, which includes listening to people more intelligent than you and explaining things to people less intelligent than you, all of the above strategy. So I got quite a few studies here. So let's get into this one here. I might spend a little bit of time with it. This is pretty interesting. And what we have here, and you'll see my speed reading in action here with the techniques I explained that I'll be using here. Because here we got something 30 pages. A lot of this has been studied for decades, without the new brain neuropsychology, but just the concept behind reading and language comprehension is not a new idea. So here's the Psychology of Reading and Language Comprehension, Carnegie Mellon, 1987. Speed reading. One type of skilled reading that has drawn the interest of educators, professionals, and students is speed reading, a form of rapid reading that is reputed to increase reading speed by a factor of 3 to 10 without much, if any, loss of comprehension. Speed reading came to public attention when it was rumored that President Kennedy read through many newspapers each day at a very fast pace. He credited Evelyn Woods, and I have Evelyn Woods. I've taken her courses. I don't know, she was like a long time ago, an early proponent of speed reading for her method of instruction. And Senator William Proxmire, who has argued that speed reading is an important resource in Americans' accomplishment of its national and international goals. In addition, countless numbers of conscientious people in the academic and business roles have received speed reading instruction. Since speed reading has much widespread appeal and potential pedagogical importance, it is useful to examine objectively the psychological processes that differentiate speed reading from normal reading, as well as the degree to which it lives up to its reputation. So in the overview, saying this is the techniques that we covered earlier, slow rate, reading the first paragraph, and then you're going to see I'm skimming through, but here I'm reading out loud, word for word, this basic information, so penetrate it to long-term memory, make me understand it better. So overview. In this chapter, we will begin with a brief review of some of the existing research on the eye fixations and comprehension levels attained by speed readers in the session called The Process in Speed Reading. The central point of this discussion is that readers can increase their reading speed by sacrificing the amount they understand from a text. Faster speed usually implies lessened comprehension, a trade-off. Consequently, the evaluation of speed reading requires assessing just how much information the speed reader misses. In the main part of the chapter, we will present a detailed report of an experimental investigation of speed reading done in our laboratory in collaboration with Michael Masson, 1982. This section is called The Study of the Eye Fixation and Comprehension of Speed Readers. The experiments assessed how speed readers scan a text and what they understand about the text, that speed readers are compared to normal readers and to students who skim the text. The study argues that the speed reader's average comes not from better perceptual processes, but from a better conceptual level processes. So to some extent, science is still out on whether speed reading works or not. So finally, in the third section, we will describe another technique for rapid reading, RSVP, reading rapid serial visual presentation. As the name suggests, the words of the text are presented at a rapid rate. We will compare this technique to speed reading, pointing out primary differences. The process of speed reading. To understand speed reading, we need to know about the processes that occur during speed reading and about the resulting information that the speed reader acquires. As in the study of other types of reading, eye fixation studies are likely to be particularly informative about the process in speed reading. Unfortunately, only a few scientific reports describe eye fixation during rapid reading, and these reports usually lack an accompanying test of the reader's comprehension, so we do not know what has been comprehended. Finally, these speeds have focused on very high reading rates, 2,000 to 10,000 words per minute, which are too far beyond the rate of normal reading to be of general interest. And I said that there are future, more recent studies that we will be getting into. This is just a big overview of the subject from 30 years ago. So, there are a lot of studies on this going back to the 60s. Comprehension level, speed readers. Do you lose anything by reading rapidly? So, here's a nice little chart. Let me just check to see who's watching this. Anything? Okay, yeah. Thank you for joining me, Jojo. And, it might be more useful to watch this at your leisure in your own time. And hopefully later tonight, I'll be adding a table of contents. So here we have, for example, moving from 200 words to 1,000 words per minute, and, different, what's comprehension? Is comprehension staying the same? Could comprehension conceivably be increasing even? Here it doesn't have that example, or is it decreasing? So that's the trade-off. What speed readers understand from the text. Although the goal of speed reading is to gain information, curiously, researchers also often overlook this purpose. Many studies of speed readers don't check what the speed reader learned, while others use poorly construed tests, and still others fail to evaluate the speed reader. So I want to look at this scientifically. I'm trying to up the intellectual content and also kind of demonstrate to people the scientific process of research, where you learn a concept and then we're going to look at the most recent scientific studies on the subject. And so now we're looking at historical science. So I've covered the idea, what is speed reading, the different techniques, and now we're looking over the scientific data. So I'm starting with this older one. So we say eye fixations are going to be extremely important. And so this one's an overview of studies, and I don't know if I'm going to go that much into these different studies, although I encourage people who are interested in the topic to read through these. And here they use the Evelyn Wood reading dynamics. Evelyn Wood's is still one of the most common speed reading techniques. And Evelyn Woods recommends the hand technique. Some people have speed reading that doesn't use the hand. So the speed readers are taught to use their hand as a pacer, moving across the text at increasingly rapid speeds as training progressed. And let me get down to some. So here are some of the results. Reading rate, normal readers, a little over 200 words a minute. Speed readers and skimmers got 700 words a minute, faster than most people could even skim. And you're looking at the gaze duration that we had talked about, that one of the detriments to speed reading obviously is the sublocalization, but also the fixed eye gaze. So normal readers have an average gaze duration of 300 microseconds, and speed readers have limited that to 200 microseconds, like skimming. Here's an interesting chart. Zoom out a little bit. So here is like a normal reading. This is like the chunking idea. So these were tests that were done to show. So normal reader basically stopped at every single, I don't know if these are microseconds. So the pattern of gaze of the normal reader, a speed reader, and a skimmer. Both the speed reader and skimmer were much more likely than normal reader to skip over several words. They also spent less time on the words they fixed aided than the normal reader. All the fixations shown in the figure are forward fixations proceeding from right to left, and I guess these are microseconds, so that slow reader might have even spent half a second on the first word coulter, as where the speed reader almost half that time, and then the normal reader chunked basically at almost every single word, and they spent quite a bit of time on every single chunk, as opposed to the speed reader, which is similar to skimming, although slightly different. Is the speed reader had chunked these things and spent much less time on chunks. So the first word coulter and understood enough were all chunks, but then the whole next part of what they said to realize that some of was a single chunk. Them, and so this concept of chunking has actually been tested. And the difference between a skimmer and a speed reader, that a speed reader is more better at chunking than just skimming. A skimmer is not necessarily doing the best chunking, as where a trained speed reader is a trained chunker. So this chart here is extremely important to understand this concept of chunking. And as I said, this is a scientific test. So I said skimming is insane, Herman. If you just came, skimming is not the same as speed reading. Skimming is where you look very briefly through everything and just try to pull out keywords, key concepts, and then slow down at those key concepts. As where speed reading, you're actually reading everything, and you might use aspects of skimming and slowing down and trying to get the more important information. So this study, actually shows the difference between speed reading and skimming. But here, this concept of chunking, which is basically the most important aspect of speed reading. So like I did want to show this. So see, where do speed readers fixate? So obviously you have to, if the eye could take in a whole page in as we said, studies will show uh, 20, like 1/20th of a second the eye could take in this whole page. So this screenshot I have right here, the eye could take this whole thing in 1/20th of a second, but the retention from doing that would be very little to almost nothing. So speed reading would be like skimming, where you might go down the line of the page and take a second or a few seconds to do it. But you might slow down and fixate. So the sampling algorithms at the heart of rapid reading is the question of how speed readers increase their speed. Early studies, along with the one we are discussing, showed that rapid readers are fast in part because they fixate a smaller proportion of the words than the normal readers. Well, the numbers above indicate what proportion of words were fixated. They do not indicate how the fixated words were distributed in the text. For example, did speed readers fixate 33% of the words by looking at every third line of print or by looking at every third word of text? To better understand the sampling pattern the rapid readers used, we counted the number of times each reader skipped exactly one word or exactly two words, and so on to determine the frequency of each skipping pattern. For example, if a reader were fixated every third word in the text, then she would always skip exactly two words. And figure 14, was this 14.4? So we're going to have another figure. So I encourage people who are interested in this to read the study. And so here this is more mathematical for people who understand scientific studies. But the concept of being a good speed reader is the ability to fixate on the more important words, to be able to look through a text. And that could be related to the conceptual frame. That the better conceptual frame, the better vocabulary, the easier it'll be for a person to fixate on what's important and what's not important, what's duplicate information and what's new information. So you see the length of run of words unfixated, the difference between speed readers, skimmers, and normal readers, where that speed reading is more efficient than skimming. To the skeptics who say that speed reading doesn't actually work, it's a scam, this study would demonstrate a little bit there is a difference between skimming and speed readers, and that to some extent speed reading is skimming, but through skimming and pulling out the more important data, really that's what speed reading is doing. If you're not looking like at increased mental capacity, and that really people do have increased mental capacity or memory. So certainly, so I want to show the and here we're going to get more into later studies of this eye fixation differences. So more differences, content words versus function words and the fixation patterns that so obviously you're going to spend more time fixated on function words, on longer words, than on shorter words. So it's semantic processing, you're analyzing gaze duration, word length, and word frequency effects. Here's a gaze duration study. Normal readers spend more time on longer words and less frequent words. Less frequent words are those with smaller log frequency. The 8 lines correspond to different word lengths from 2 letters to 9 letters. Word frequency has a similar effect on words of each length, and the downward slope on all the lines indicates the results are for the normal readers who are reading the Mars passage. So as we showed earlier, that increasing your vocabulary will increase your ability to speed read. And you see that everybody reads different at different speeds. So he had the skimmers, speed readers, and normal readers, and we're looking at um, how fast they're reading something. I guess this was split into screens and how this was studied. And so even people who read 200 words a minute, they might vary between 200 and 300 words a minute based on difficulty of passage. Skimmers are actually slower than speed readers. varying between 5 and 600 words a minute, and speed readers varying between 6 and 800 words a minute in the different studies. So that's why I say you can't just, speed reading is not a constant. You do have to slow up and speed down to be an effective speed reader. So here they're saying that normal reading led to much better comprehension than speed reading or skimming. We'll see different studies that might show that speed readers could actually have better comprehension than normal readers, although for the same person who speed reads versus normal reading. So if you're looking at your average uneducated person who reads 200 words a minute versus an educated speed reader trained that reads 1,000 words a minute, that speed reader might have more comprehension than your average reader. But like for me, a trained speed reader, obviously I would gain more from reading 200 words a minute than 1,000 words a minute. And so here you have correct response percentage. But even if you looked at it, so if people reading 200 words a minute are recalling 80%, and speed readers who are reading 3 times faster are recalling 60%, there's still a benefit to speed reading and even skimming. So, in summary, this study suggests that speed readers attain a new reading skill, but one with limited applications relative to untrained rapid readers. Speed readers had a comprehensive advantage only in high-level information from text on familiar topics. That is, the skill is not helpful in all text or for all types of information. This evidence strongly implies that speed reading skills is not at all perceptual, but conceptual. Instead, acquiring speed reading skills consists of learning to infer connections between those segments of the text that happen to have been sampled, if only one for the familiar material that readers have sufficiently detailed schematic to support the inference making. The speed readers, in effect, do more top-down processing using previous knowledge to infer what is in the text and less bottom-up processing, perceiving words and word sequences than normal readers. The eye fixation behavior of normal readers, speed readers, and skimmers provide several insights about the processes that underlie rapid reading. While normal readers sample the text fairly densely, fixating about 80% of the content words, rapid readers fixate only about half as many words, 30 to 40%, and for only 2/3 of the duration, 200 to 240 milliseconds per fixated word. Content words are twice as likely to be fixated as function words, both by normal readers and rapid readers. However, in the case of rapid readers, this results almost entirely due to the generally greater length of content words. Neither speed readers nor skimmers are very selective about fixating the most important words in text. The span over which rapid readers extract word meaning is relatively narrow. Rapid readers cannot answer questions about a detail if they did not fixate directly on it or within 3-character spaces of it. Both rapid reading groups modulate their reading rate over various proportions. Finally, the gaze duration of normal and rapid readings on a fixated word are proportional to the word's length and the logarithmic of its normal frequency, although the parameters associated with these two effects for rapid readers are considerably smaller for normal readers. The eye fixation indicate where the reader's advantage does not lie. The speed readers do not use an exotic scanning strategy, except their scanning is more uniform, which may free some attentional resources, nor does the speed reader's advantage reside in sampling more important words or in a wider perceptual span. So the speed reader's advantage is primarily conceptual. In putting together the information that is fortuitously sampled, it is probably best to look at speed reading as a means of realizing an already existing potential for inference making rather than a radical transformation of the reading comprehension skill. Admittedly, this study explained only a limited range of speed reading skilled, newly trained readers who took a 7-week course, and the conclusion might not generalize the expert speed readers who have had much more practice and might attain rates considerably faster than 600 to 700 words per minute. It is also true that many speed readers are probably of the same skill level as the subjects we have discussed. The general notion of speed reading accuracy trade-off in reading is a good one for understanding some of the conflicts in the literature about the benefits of speed reading. In particular, this concepts help explain why some research have reported speed gains without losses in comprehension. Whether a reader can learn to read faster without loss of comprehension will depend on the reader's initial location on the hypothetical speed accuracy curve. And if the text is easy, the reader should be able to read much faster without sacrificing comprehension. On the other hand, if the text is difficult, then increasing in speed are likely to result in sacrifices in comprehension. Although the speed accuracy function is a useful concept, it is also a simplification. Because the accuracy of comprehension is not a single dimension, comprehension consists of attaining several different kinds of information, which may vary in its susceptibility to various reading speeds. There is another salient aspect of speed reading that we have not formally assessed: how stressful and effectual it can be. Several of the speed readers volunteered that they found speed reading to be a very demanding technique. Presumably, some of the stress may be due to the acquisition of the new technique. However, even expert speed readers have informally commented that prolonged speed reading is effortful and difficult to maintain. There may be some cost to extended running of the mental engine at high speed. And we have the RSVP technique, which I guess people can look into this on their own. So I'm glad we went through that study in some detail. I see that put me down to 5 viewers. Chunking is the essential technique, and later studies have shown that expert speed readers are actually much better than this was speed readers who had just finished the 7-week course, as opposed to someone like me who's been speed reading for 25 years. I learned the technique when I was 12 in grade school and have been doing it for over 20 years. So some studies have shown that experts have had different studies, and hopefully we'll get into that. So let's look at this. So much to read, so little time, and then I'll look into the speed reading course that has a critique of it. So this study is So much to read, so little time, 2016, that the prospect of speed reading at increased speed without any loss of comprehension has undeniable appeal. Speed reading has been an intriguing concept for decades, ever since Evelyn Woods introduced her reading dynamics training program in 1959. It has recently increased in popularity, with speed reading apps and technology being introduced for smartphones and digital devices. The current article reviews what the scientific community knows about the reading process a great deal, in discussing the implications of the research findings for potential students of speed reading training programs or purchasers of high speed reading apps. The research shows that there's a trade-off between speed and accuracy. It is unlikely that readers will be able to double or triple their reading speed, from around 250 to 500 to 750 words per minute, while still being able to understand the text as well as if they had read at normal speed. If a thorough understanding of the text is not the reader's general goal, the speed reading or skimming the text will allow the reader to get through it faster with moderate comprehension. The way to maintain high comprehension and get through a text faster is to practice reading and to become more skilled language user through increased vocabulary. This is because language skill is at the heart of reading speed. So you have, they actually do have world speed reading championships. The person who read Harry Potter in 47 minutes, which was 4,200 words per minute, and she then summarized the book. And another person, world's fastest speed reader, was able to read at 30,000 words per minute and then demonstrate comprehension by summarizing what they just read. So there are people who have demonstrated this phenomenon of immense ability to speed read with good comprehension. So is there a unique form of reading in which speed and comprehension are both high? Can we learn to read in this way through speed reading courses, or can we achieve it with little or no practice by using special technology? As before, we said reading, skimming, and speed reading. Reading is typically defined as the process of textual information so as to recover the intended meaning of each word, phrase, and sentence. Of course, there are some forms of literature in which the author intentionally provides some level of ambiguity. For the most part, though, the authors would like the readers to understand what they intend to communicate and understand all of the words in the text. Often the goal of reading is to learn something new, whether it is in fact from a textbook, a story, or a novel, or instructions from a manual. Successful reading thus requires more than recognizing a sequence of individual words. It also requires understanding the relationship among them and making inference about the unstated entities that might be involved in the scenario being described. Reading can be contrasted with skimming, in which the goal is to quickly move one's eyes through the text to find a specific word or piece of information or to get a general idea of the text content. As we will discuss later, skimming rates can be as much as 2 to 4 times faster than those of typical silent reading. Comprehension rates, however, are lower when skimming than when reading, suggesting a trade-off between speed and comprehension accuracy. Where does speed reading fall in the reading skimming spectrum? Our brief discussions of trade-offs between speed and comprehension suggest that the reader cannot have his cake and eat it too, in the sense that comprehension must necessarily suffer if the reading process becomes more like skimming. Indeed, we will see there is little evidence for unique behavior such as speed reading, in which speed and comprehension both high. So I'm going to skim through this, speed read it. The writing systems, and we have the how you form a word and how you chunk a word through sounds, and that be in different languages, and there's fonts. And here's this eye fixation idea where the eye could only have high accuracy at one time. And so the high accuracy and the actual like degree, 2 degree. So here you have the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, and that answer Brundlefly on my Twitter, saying he's trying to secure me a debate with Jay Dyer. Thank you. And you see like typing speed, connection between speed reading and speed typing maybe. But the concept here is that the periphery is more blurry, and that's why I mentioned before, like the Alexander technique and the speed readers and the martial arts and improving your peripheral vision related to speed reading. So this study is trying to claim that there's a maximum that you could actually intake, and that the eye fixation idea is chunking is possibly flawed. You'll look into the visual system, concepts for the eye works, very interesting. I would like to get more into this. This idea of cicadas, about eye movement lasting 20 to 35 milliseconds and span the distance of 7 letters that they're claiming. And we'll talk more about these cicadas for people that know more about it. This concept of how the eye processes visual data and the brain processes this data, and this will get into the concept of consciousness, and is the brain just the sense perception technique and really there's something involved with the soul, or is it purely a data processing, even though we don't know how the brain processes language or even understands thought. We do know how the brain processes visual images. So, here would be an example like we were talking about in chunking, from the visual data perception of the cicada going across or possibly skipping or regressions. An example of time going by, if your eye is moving across the line. And I said like the technique of holding your finger down the middle of the page, where you try to take in the line at a whole time, or you at least your eye moves from left to right as you go line to line, but your finger stays in the center. And so they're questioning whether this technique, whether you could actually take in the whole line, different in languages, different studies in size, and so there's study on fixation durations, saccade length, regressions. which we talked about being subvocalizations, fixations, regressions are actually problems and prevent you from speed reading. So you can see the reading rate here, just interesting data. The more a person fixates and the more they regress, how that affects their speed reading rate. So you can see the less regressions, the quicker people read. So I'm going to go over a review of this article also from a speed reading course. And here we'll also look at data that studies that show when you put like green and green, blue, as opposed to like putting the wrong color with the letters of that color and perception. And there's a lot of studies like this on cognition. And me and JF had mentioned some of these. And I'm going to look at the critique of this article, but this article is trying to say that speed reading may not actually happen. It may be a scientific fallacy. And so advocates of training courses make a number of assumptions about how silent reading occurs and how speed can be increased without sacrificing comprehension. And they were saying purely visual intake, that by just visual intake, the brain is capable of intaking large amounts of data, pure visual intake. That's the theory of speed reading, is that just the visual intake is enough to gather quite a bit of information, and that visual intake could actually conceivably intake tens of thousands of words per minute. So central to this claim is the idea that our brain is rather lazy, then we effectually process much less data than they were actually capable of. A specific claim is that readers have the ability to take in much more information in a single glance than they normally do, and that training can unlock this ability. For example, in 2/3 of a sample of 40 books on speed reading methods, the claim is made that a reader's span of recognition can be improved with practice. Most of the books also strongly advocate against making regressive eye movements while reading. A survey of sample of more recent publications that we undertook revealed that they contain similar ideas, including recommendations to use peripheral vision to expand the number of words that can be read in a single fixation and to reduce regressive eye movements. The argument is that after training, speed readers can process entire groups of words and phrases in a single fixation. And at the extreme, it is claimed that speed readers can zigzag down one page and up the other page, processing the information in the text much more efficiently than normal readers still do. As anyone who watched my PostJF stream, that's what I was mentioning. I just read this the other day because people were asking for me to do on speed reading. So this is my first time reading this. The evidence that we have reviewed on normal reading challenges these claims. Firstly, what limits our ability to process text is our capability to recognize words and understand text. It is highly likely that we can increase the ability by learning to make eye movements differently. Second, processing words out of order from the sensible sequence of sentences, or when some of the words are removed, as would happen when the speed reader uses zigzag movement, impairs the ability to process and understand the words. Third, regressive eye movements actually support comprehension rather than causing a problem for reading. Together, these facts about reading suggest that the ability to read is limited by our ability to tend to identify and understand words rather than our ability to see them. Even if our own vision could be improved, we would not necessarily read faster. This conclusion is consistent with the finding that attempts to train readers to use peripheral visions more effectively with simple perceptual tasks that flash words in the periphery have not been successful in allowing them to read more quickly with good comprehension. Extremely important stuff here. I'm down to 4 viewers here because this is pretty high IQ stuff. And Insane Herman, I'm glad you're here. And it could be this relates to the debate of consciousness, whether consciousness is coming from the soul or the brain. Because as we say that there is no actual understanding how the brain produces thought. And obviously, a sense perception is a process of the brain, but is consciousness a process of the brain? So, I said that, you're the only one watching in the chat. I'm glad you're here. So, I'm going to continue. And I said this will be more useful just to document and, even just for myself as a learning technique, a public learning session. But hopefully this will be useful to people later when I timestamp a table of contents. and put all, have all the links clearly in it. So this concept of speed reading that we said suppressing the inner voice. Another claim that underlies speed reading courses is that through training, speed readers can increase reading efficiency by inhibiting subvocalization. This is the speech that we often hear in our heads when we read. This inner speech is an abbreviated form of speech that is not heard by others and that may not involve overt movements of the mouth, but that is nevertheless experienced by the reader. Speed reading proponents claim that this inner voice is a habit that carries over from the fact that we learn to read out loud before we start reading silently, and the inner speech is a drag on reading speed. Many of the speed reading books we surveyed recommend the elimination of the inner voice as a mean for reading comprehension. Speed reading proponents are generally not very specific about what they mean when they suggest eliminating inner speech. According to one advocate, at some point, you have to dispense with sound if you want to be a speed reader, but the idea seems to be that we should be able to read via purely visual mode and that speech processes will slow us down. However, research on normal reading challenges this claim that the use of inner speech in silent reading is a bad habit. As we discussed earlier, there's evidence that inner speech plays an important role in word identification and comprehension during salient read. Attempts to eliminate inner speech have been shown to result in impairments in comprehension when texts are reasonably difficult and require readers to make inference. Even readers reading sentences via RSVP at 720 words per minute appear to generate sound-based representations of the words. Interesting. Science doesn't even understand what this voice in our head is. Science cannot demonstrate to you that this voice in our head actually comes from the brain. So, just an interesting concept for those who believe in the soul and consciousness to ponder, what is this voice in our head? Is it something from the brain? And as I mentioned, speed reading could be a use of this voice in our head. When do we use it? How often do we use it? Shutting it off using purely visual sensory. And then I said for memorizing and understanding, all of the above strategies. So the key is you're basically are skimming, and the key is being able to pick out the more important parts and slow down and even repeat, subvocalize, and regress on those parts. So evaluation of trained speed readers. Although the results of the studies we have reviewed suggest that the claims of speed reading courses are overstated, it could be argued that data from people who read at typical speeds cannot be generalized to speed readers. Perhaps speed readers are doing something very different from typical readers. Indeed, studies of extraordinary performers in other cognitive domains have hinted at this idea. For example, the average person is capable of remembering only about 7 items in their presented order. Larger sequences lead to various types of memory errors. However, several years ago, 2 researchers found an undergraduate whose initial performance was average but climbed to over 80 items after 20 months of practice. And they actually have competitions on this. As a long distance runner, he was familiar with the format of running, to chunking digits. So there has been demonstrations that there are exceptions that clearly do demonstrate this ability. Although there's not well controlled in terms of scientific research, it's been demonstrated from scientific research that there are people that do break the model and are extremely quick speed readers without decreases in comprehension. And in other fields, although there hasn't been the type of scientific testing to really understand it, and hence I might go to my arguments for the soul and saying scientists don't even understand how the brain works in the first place. So what about the studies that I mentioned earlier in the other older text? So here we have overview of the studies. So the most complete study of the eye movements and comprehension of speed readers was carried out by Just, Mason, and Carpenter. I think that was the one I was reading earlier. Presented passages of speed readers, normal readers, and people who were asked to skim. That's the one I went over earlier. So what about the phenomenal fast speed readers such as Ann Jones and Howard Berg mentioned at the beginning of the article? One advantage Jones had in reading the new Harry Potter book was having read earlier books in the series. That experience probably allowed her to capitalize on a large amount of background knowledge about such things as characters, plot structure, and writing. Combining that background knowledge with visual sampling from pages of the new book and a highly developed ability to engage in extended inferencing could have allowed her to generate a coherent synopsis of the book. Anybody who looked and took my lecture on philosophy of science, we talked about anomalies. So here, the author is trying to reject the ability of speed reading, but what about these anomalies of these people that successfully could do it? And here he's actually supporting, and we're going to look at the critique of this article of that. They're saying that, yeah, they are using these techniques of plot structure and memory and comprehension skills to increase their ability. To summarize, there's no evidence that training programs allow people to dramatically increase their reading rates while maintaining excellent comprehension. Skimming. Okay, so I wanted to, technology, RSVP, scrolling technology and the cicadas. We'll look at that later in more studies. So, in a few other computer technologies. So that's all I'm going to look at from this study. So now I'm going to get, this is speed reading a hoax article. I'm going to put this up here next, and this is a direct refutation to this article. Let me check the chat real quick. Yeah, so Insane Hermit believes that the consciousness comes from both the soul and the brain. So obviously the person who wrote that critique only believed in the brain, and that might be hence why they're rejecting speed reading, because they're looking for the answer within the brain. And obviously, just the concept of the voice inside our head, science does not have an explanation of the origins or what this voice inside our head is. And yes, I agree with you, Insane Hermit, the brain is like a receptor, and I would like to do more on consciousness. My goal, is to have more time, and that's why I'm trying to create this intellectual community. Thank you for participating, Truth Cooperator. Yeah, I don't know the details, but I'm saying there has been studies, there has been tested where people have conclusively been able to perform these phenomenal mental capacities that go against the studies that say that it's a hoax. So I'm saying that there are definitely examples of people that speed read. And in terms of creating a scientific test, and what's the advantage of someone like me who's a believer in soul and God to make myself susceptible to a test of an atheist in a lab whose point is to reject me. So there could be that problem. So let's look at this is from a speed reading technique course, someone who offers speed reading courses, and here they're examining this this article here. And this person goes through and actually kind of shows that the people, although scientists who understood the scientific method and processes and research and created a test and used the proper hypothesis, the model method training for trying to understand speed reading, in actuality they really didn't get it, and they understood quite a bit. And so here we saw that chart of the author claimed in the article that the property of rods and cones in the human eye, showing diagrams of how our eyes are able to focus on a very limited area called fovea. They conclude these facts about rods and cones have some important implications for reading. As we have discussed, all text, regardless of writing systems, are comprised of combinations of lines, normally dark on a white background. Therefore, fine discrimination between dark and light areas is essential to recognize the visual elements of writing. If the light pattern coming from the word hits the fovea, the cone will easily recognize such fine details and the relay pattern with high fidelity to the brain. However, if the word hits the non-fovea areas and is sensed primarily by rods, it will be relayed to the brain as an average and will appear fuzzy. This will make it difficult to discern the exact identities of the symbols. In fact, when people are asked to report The identity of word that is presented so briefly that they cannot make an eye movement. Accuracy is high and the foveum drops off dramatically, with performance research reaching chance levels around the middle of the paraphobia, approximately 3 degrees of visual angles away from fixation. Actually, I was at Stony Brook University in New York, and I took neuropsychology, and I actually took one of these tests where they, monitored my eye movement and hooked up my brain, and I was part of one of these tests. So these facts cast doubt on the suggestion from speed reading proponents that people can read more effectively by using peripheral vision, taking an entire line or even an entire page at a time. The Alexander technique, a direct attack on the Alexander technique. So what's the inconsistency according to Jonathan, who teaches speed reading? The authors claim that anything outside of the fovea area, the central point of focus of the eye, words are fuzzy and difficult to discern. But a few paragraphs later, the author provided much stronger arguments against their own claim that I could possibly hope to when they shift their attention away from photo reading towards debunking apps like Spritz that show you one word at a time. In this argument, the author claims that these apps don't work because they don't allow you to see the context of the other words around the word you're reading, even if those are words you skip as the reader. To quote importantly, just because one word is skipped does not mean that it was not processed at all. All major theories on reading posit that the word skipping is based on at least partial recognition of the word from information attained in the parafoveal vision and or expectations about the word's identity. This shows that readers are actually processing many or most of the words they skip over along with the words they fixate. So there's conflicting studies, further from conflicts in the thing the study we just read. Although acuity is lower in the paraphobia than the fovea, information in the paraphobia is not completely ignored. If a word to the right of the fixated word disappears after 60 milliseconds, reading behavior is disrupted. Even if a word reappears once it is directly fixated, the finding suggests that readers use information from more than just a fixated word in order to read efficiently. So they just contradicted what they just said. He shows a different study of the Schultz table, a common strategy for training the mind to recognize further out of the paraphobia. So here we're scientifically arguing the use of the fovea and paraphobia information to process text. Now that we have reviewed the characteristics of eye movements, we return to the issue of how information is obtained from a text once an eye movement is made. Visual perception occurs very rapidly, so rapidly, in fact, that even if a word disappears completely after only 60 milliseconds of directly looking at it, reading behavior is unaffected. That is, fixation durations were similar regardless of whether the word remained visible or was erased or masked after 60 milliseconds. Hard for a scientist to disprove a speed reader because a speed reader could read through all these scientific papers. Findings suggest that visual perception takes only a small fraction of fixation durations, leaving time for higher level cognitive and linguistic processing to occur before the decision of when to move the eyes next. So, here the Jonathan, the speed reading teacher, yes, they are correct, but they're misanalyzing the data. The difference is that we've been saying that if you can process the visual information you look at the end of the paragraph or even at the end of the page, if you're creating a visual mnemonic markers rather than after every word. This method of batching the processing and comprehension is only possible by learning advanced memory techniques to overcome the limits of short-term memory. More on that later. So more from the study that actually supports speed reading. When a word falls within the perceptual span, it can be perceived but not necessarily fully identified. So the word identification span is about 7 characters. So yes, not just with the fact that you can read multiple lines at once, but yes, authors themselves make the point that our perceptual span is wider than just the word we're reading. In fact, it includes about 7 characters to the right, another word or two. Funny enough, that's almost exactly the claim we make in our speed reading training. The general finding from the studies using the boundary paradigm is that readers attain peripheral and pre-real benefit. That is, they're faster to read the target when they preview what was identical to the target than what the preview differed from the target. So, this course has the 3 fixations on a normal page, which has about 8 to 10 words, taking into account readers are able to comprehend even while saying nonsense words out loud to reduce subvocalization. So more in the specific technique. So, here it's saying this paper that was supposed to be a paper debunking speed reading actually is supporting it. It's saying that in terms of the study, and many of the findings in this study actually support the concept of speed reading. So authors debunk a lot of speed reading courses which claim you could read entire sentences or zigzag across pages. And, Jonathan agrees. For all the reasons above, the only place he would differ is that I strongly believe that people can take in small groups of words, as I explained, the researchers' own findings substantiated. The authors have to admit that there are proven cases of speed reading, even if they're overstated. The funny thing is their defense to the claim that these people aren't doing what other people are doing. They give the example of someone who did impossible memory techniques of numbers using chunking and memory techniques to lean on long-term memory instead of short-term memory, and then defending their stance by saying, is something similar going on to train speed reading? So obviously that's what speed reading is saying. The main thing that I opened up, chunking is the main technique of speed reading. That's exactly what we're advocating that you do, the use of memory techniques to overcome traditional limitations and push information into your long-term memory instead of reading slowly and using your short-term memory. I mean, really, like, Jonathan's right. He's saying really their support favored what they were saying, and it's kind of poor science. So I encourage people who are interested in this to read through it. And more debunking the exact studies, more studies on that the brain could recognize things much faster than we process it. So here, modest claims anyone could get to 600 to 750 words per minute, even a below average intelligent person. And looking at brain processing speeds, one word about 100 milliseconds to read 600 words per minute, and clearly even a below average intelligence brain is capable of processing that according to the information. These studies, Children's Hospital showing that picking up signals at 100 milliseconds. So, Jonathan's selling speed reading here. I'm not selling a course in it. I'm advocating it in terms of self-actualization and benefit the intellectual content of the discussions, and just reviewing the techniques for myself in my hopes of I would like to be able to read 10,000 words per minute. I would like to, be able to do the impossible in that sense. And I'm a believer in the soul and the spirit and God and the power of prayer. And I will continue to try to increase my speed reading. So speed reading is a controversial topic, and the research isn't all positive and favorable. But thing you see that in the link here, there's actually a podcast that discusses this. So you see that I wouldn't give up on speed reading. And yeah, I don't know if I'm going to test myself. I mean, you could somewhat see my ability to speed read just by the fact that I'm doing a public study session, and you could see how fastly I intake or skim, or my ability to gain this information just from my public study session. Yeah, and Insane Hermit, I mentioned towards the beginning the connection between meditation and when you said stopping the subvocalization, regression, and eye fixating, that someone who's practiced meditation, martial arts, or something like that. I don't know if anyone does like martial arts or like jujitsu or something like that, or Tai Chi, where you're doing muscle muscle pattern recognition, where you do the same thing over and over again, so that you don't actually, you disconnect your muscle memory to your sensory perception, or maybe the sense of smell or sound or touch. If you're doing like jujitsu, you want your muscle memory connected to your sense of touch as opposed to your sense of sight. And so people who've done meditation of the different sorts have a heads up in these speed reading techniques. And I'm not here to do a test myself. Like I believe in speed reading, and I am going over the scientific evidence of it, and I do think that's useful even for myself. And just the fact that me, a private intellectual who just does this in my spare time, could read through, skim through, take the main points out of these main studies. But yes, meditation will help, stopping the subvocalization. If you've already meditated, you probably know how to do it. So if you're new to speed reading, that's the biggest holdup, is these things that hold you up, the eye fixation, regression, and subvocalization. So if you've already learned how to stop doing these things through meditation, you could immediately go to reading 600 words a minute. And it's hard to get over 300 words a minute as long as you're subvocalizing, doing regressions and eye fixations. Okay, here's another study on eye movements and readings. I mean, really showing you the most recent studies on the data. I do believe in speed reading. I went over in the post-JF debate in like 5-10 minutes the basics of speed reading, and here I collected PowerPoints. And okay, enjoy esoteric. I'm glad you joined me. If you want, you could, tomorrow or maybe later tonight, I'll have the table of contents joined and time stamped, so you'll be able to just look at the parts that are useful to you. And I'm going to continue with more research on the subject and try to get down to this isn't really the technical. I think reading these studies and data on it will help people who just desire to speed read, and for the skeptics out there that don't believe that speed reading is possible. So let's dig right in to this is 2004 European Journal of Cognitive Psychology, Theoretical Perspectives on Eye Movement in Reading, Past Controversies, Current Issues, and Agenda for Further Research. And from the Germany and UK. And you'll see the speed reading techniques, skimming, headers, bold, opening paragraphs, first letter of paragraphs, basic skimming techniques that I mentioned in the slideshows I showed at the beginning. Study of eye movements has become well established and widely used in methodology and experimental reading research. Experimental reading research. This introduction provides a survey of some key methodological issues, followed by discussion of the major trends in the development of theories of models of eye movements, control, and fluent reading. Among the issues to be considered in future research are problems of methodology, or stronger grounding in basic research, integration with the neighboring area of research on single word recognition, more systematic approaches to model evaluation and comprehension, and more work on individual variation and effects of task demands in reading. Aim in this introduction to provide a brief survey over the field of eye movements and information processing in normal reading. Start out with a discussion of some important methodological issues intended primarily to help readers from other areas understand the terminology and get a feel for the kind of data that form the base of work in the field. We will then concentrate on what has been a dominant theme of much recent work, the development of theories and models of eye movement, control, and fluent reading. The discussion will provide a basis for identifying issues that may have been neglected in prior research and might consequently be considered as topics for the future. So like I'm saying, for the speed reading concept, important terms and the frame. Really, I'm demonstrating these techniques in what I'm doing right now in terms that, Jonathan, the speed reading expert and teacher, had said that, you have to use memorization, framework, conceptualizing techniques. That's the basis of speed reading. So it could be I'll have to read this stuff slower because I'm new to this. Like I'm relatively, I just found these, I skimmed them earlier, and I didn't even read this before in advance. So you're witnessing speed reading and skimming these techniques in practice, and the ability to first form a framework and define the terms will allow the ability to speed read. Okay, National, thanks for joining me. As I said, this might be more useful for you to look at in it might be useful for you to look at in the future. Sorry for the distraction. As we mentioned earlier, distractions limit the ability to speed read. Okay, first, the viewpoint of perception and motor control. Reading can be viewed as a task where the visual procession and sensor motor control take place in a highly structured visual environment. The text page contains letters, words, lines of text, paragraphs, forming a hierarchy of visual objects. However, it is an array of visual information significantly less complex than any realistic scene of natural objects. Reading thus allows for the examination of basic issues in perception and motor control in an ecologically valid situation. While subjects are engaged in a complex visual cognitive task, in reality, the first approach is a more theoretical possibility than routine research strategy. One of the relatively few but influential examples is the linking of eye movement controlled in reading to a perceptual center of gravity phenomenon carried out by O'Regan in 1990. Another key element for the basic oculomotor research that has had a significant influence on the theory building is the principle of temporal overlap in the programming of successive ciccadas introduced into reading research by Morrison in 1984. Second theoretical perspective, rooted in the mainstream of cognitive psychology, sees reading as a special case of a complex process of information acquisition, functioning at roughly the same level as the process of understanding a pictorial scene, a multitude of processes modulating the need to work together on several levels to turn the arrays of combined visual features comprising letters into words and concepts that eventually form a mental representation of a text. Of central importance is the process. In this process are the coordination of processes, the time scale in which they unfold, and their interaction with underlying memory senses. Examples here might be the issue of serial versus parallel processing of linguistic information at the letter and word level, or the question of whether certain types of information are processed in a modular or interactive way. Eye movement research from this perspective has led into the development of several realistic computational models of reading that combine mechanisms of oculomotor control and linguistic processes to account for a wide range of empirical phenomena. Finally, eye movement measures have played a central role as a tool to develop the test psycholinguistic hypothesis about the processes of written language. In the recent past, this has been the most prominent and arguably the most fruitful approach in literature. There have been literally hundreds of studies exploiting the potential of temporal measures like fixation and gaze during online indicators of processing load, and spatial measures like fixation, positions, and saccadic amplitudes as indices of the direction and sequence of processing. There are strong interrelations between these theoretical perspectives. For example, visual motor research can make transparent the methodological strength and weaknesses of eye movement measures in psycholinguistic research, but equal psycholinguistical motivated research has raised questions that demand examinations in terms of the visual motor dimensions. For example, the issue of long-range regressive saccades triggered by higher-order linguistic processing. Kennedy, 2003, the paper assembled in the present special issue of the European Junior Cognitive Psychology contribute both in isolation and in different forms of interrelation. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to skip the methodological. I'm not really concerned with the method here. Let's see these definitions. I'm going to read these definitions out loud, as the memory technique. Definitions, the more commonly used word-based spatial eye movement measures. saccade amplitude, saccade length, saccade extent, distance and character positions between the mean position and two successive fixations, fixation probability, inverse measure, skipping rate, relative frequency with which a word is fixated at least once, inverse measure, frequency of word skipping, fixation position, fixation location, position within a word, and characters where a fixation is located. The empty space between words are coded as 0. Launch distance, launch site, distance and characters between the location of the prior fixation and the beginning of the current word, fixation frequency, mean absolute number of fixation per word for the current pass defined as first, second encounter with specified text, refixation probability frequency, relative frequency of making at least one additional fixation before leaving a word. So in terms of studies, we had saccade amplitude, length, and extent, fixation probability, inverse measure, skipping rate, fixation position, location, launch distance, site, fixation frequency, and refixation probability and frequency. And some parameters: initial first fixation duration, refixation duration, gaze duration, rereading time, total fixation time. Initial first fixation duration, duration of the first fixation within a word, irrespective of whether more fixations follow. Refixation duration, some duration of additional fixations within the current pass prior to an exit from the word. Gaze duration, some duration of all fixations before leaving the word within the current pass. Rereading time, some duration of all fixations made after leaving the word for the first time. Total reading time, total fixation time, some duration of all fixations made on the critical word. So, saying this paper is focused on how they're testing it, which isn't really my focus here. My focus is actually on teaching people speed reading, and but I do want people to see the research on the scientific understanding of whether it works or not. Yeah, King Kush is making that, people are complaining in my videos of my rapid eye movement. And so, the studies, saying, oh, rapid eye movement means you're a liar, God forbid, as opposed to, rapid eye movement, showing that I'm thinking or using speed reading techniques. So, that's part, what does rapid eye movement mean? And people are just saying, oh, it means you're lying, God forbid, or you're not, speaking trustfully. And that's pretty inaccurate. So let's try to understand these theories and models of eye movement control and reading. We'll focus on the development of detailed explanations of eye movement control, how are saccades generated during reading, how do linguistic processes and the visual motor machinery interact to produce the observed oculomotor phenomenon. The general questions represent an underlying theoretical preoccupation of the past 2 decades, namely the identification of factors responsible for the where and when of eye movement control and reading. With response to the where issue, this is now a consensus that the position of fixation and word-based such that the key aspect is the decision as to which word is to be selected as the target for the next fixation. Fortunately, there are only a few alternatives to be considered in this decision, as the vast majority of saccades departing from the specific word either land on the same word again, your refixations, or go to the immediate following word or to words beyond that. The inner-word regressions, bringing the eyes to positions left of the current word boundary, also predominantly land on words 1 or 2 past. Word targeting decisions are primarily based on low-level information like word length and saccade launch distance, but cognitive factors such as word frequency and predictability also play a significant role. Somewhat independent of the selection of which word to fixate is the specification of the precise saccadic amplitude needed to bring the eyes to the selected target. There are several lines of evidence suggesting that saccades, including refixation saccades, are aimed at the center of the selected word target, which can be related to the fact that the locations near the word center appear to be optimal both for saccade targeting and foveal word processing. It is also largely agreed that owing to visual motor constraints, the eyes are systematically deviated from the target location, creating the well-known difference between the optimal and the preferred saccade landing position, the latter being located about halfway between the beginning and the center of the word target. The temporal aspect of eye movement control when primarily concerns the question as to when a given saccade is triggered, or more precisely, the time course of processing events and control decisions occurred during a fixation. Close to the rated question is what information is used within the first time frame to guide the eyes. As noted above, there is no doubt that control decisions can be based on information acquired online during the ongoing fixation. Effects on information acquired earlier in the text on viewing time measures can be significant when contextual constraints, either in terms of local word associations or more global context, is very strong. A common way to determine the strength of contextual constraint is via measures of the predictability of the next word on the basis of all prior words in a sentence or a longer passage of text. Attempts to account for the detailed time course of oculomotor control during reading have recently been buttressed by converging technologies. Found in an ERP study, a single word process that evoke potential responses for low frequency and high frequency words start to diverge at about 130 milliseconds. This represents an estimate of the lower bound of the time to achieve lexical access. At the other end of the time scale, results using double step paradigm suggest that the amplitude of a saccade can be modified no later than 70 to 90 milliseconds before the end of a current fixation. So the issues sketched above have been at the core of a controversy that has dominated discussions in the field for more than a decade. One position is that the debate has been that eye movements in reading are largely controlled by lexical processing, with lexical access determining both the position and fixations, their duration, and the probability that a word will be skipped. Typical in this position is the attention-based sequential processing model, introduction by Morrison in 1984 and reformulated by Henderson and Ferreira in 1990 and Rayner and Palestic in 1989. In the Morrison model, lexical access on a word causes a shift of visual attention to the next word, followed after a certain latency by a saccade, and the next word is easy to process. A second attention shift can take place, the eyes remaining on the first word. In this way, a process of cancellation and reprogramming of the ensuing saccade could lead to the next word being skipped. The Morrison model successfully accounted for some basic phenomenon, in particular the existence of parafoveal processing, but suffered limitations such as lack of a mechanism to handle refixations and an inability to account for the fact that parafoveal processing is modulated by current foveal difficulty. The existence of visual motor constraints was acknowledged in this model, but they did not play a significant role in its instantiation. So for people watching this, I want to understand what is going on in my head when I read and process this information. I am a speed reader. I've been doing it for over 25 years. I believe it's fact, although, scientifically showing it is interesting. And so here we're trying to show the cognitive models that are trying to understand what is actually happening when we read and what would be the difference between a speed reader and a normal reader in terms of this fixation and eye movement and your refixation and regression. So, just trying to understand the theories for how the cognitive process of reading occurs, regardless of whether you think it's a brain function or a soul function, and looking at obviously the brain controls the sense perception. And when we read, even if you have some Platonic idea, like the concepts are coming from some spiritual world, but there obviously is some process where our eyes are intaking this sensory information and trying to understand what exactly is this process doing. And even if it's a subconscious or method, we're talking about milliseconds here, and control and like target and eye fixation and going from one target to the next, and like where you could test it exactly hitting the target and how fast. So this is fascinating. I hope that other people are gaining from it. And I said, like, this paper is from 2004. I have more on this. We are covering I do want to get more into consciousness, and people who do follow me will see that I'm going to get more into consciousness, and this is like a stepping board for the future discussions. We're going to get into consciousness, and this idea of processing language and reading will be a springboard for my further, more esoteric understandings of what consciousness is. Let's look at the chat here. Well, yeah, I mean, the Saint Hermit is say like, yeah, academic tests. I'm reading this for the first time. This is a public study session. I hope you're clicking on the link and reading this also and can intelligently converse. And I'm trying to create an intellectual community of people that are interested in these topics, even though we might agree and disagree on many different issues, multiculturalism, the JQ, and all these different issues, that we could both agree that speed reading is interesting. I would like to be able to read 10,000 words per minute. I'm sure you would like to be able to read 10,000 words per minute. We both would like to understand these same subjects. And yes, I'm reading these words not only, I'm not shutting off my subvocalization to speed read it. I'm saying it out loud. I'm visualizing it. I'm going to repeat this data later. I'm going to rewatch my own video. And, so that's the point of speed reading. When I mentioned all of the above strategy, the point where you only use the visual cue for the less important information, you have to create the framework and the network. So, this is the technique of speed reading, where I say I'm creating the framework right now in my mind with these concepts, with the multiple strategy and memory. And as I mentioned, the main thing to being able to read past 600-700 words per minute is memory techniques, comprehension techniques, and chunking techniques. So right now, yes, I'm reading these, at about 200 words per minute. This is important enough that I'm reading this out loud at maybe only 150 words a minute. Okay. The alternative position has been the claim that low-level visual processing and oculomotor factors are mainly responsible for the positioning of the eyes over a line of text, that it is these factors that have the stronger influence on viewing time measures. This found in the clearest expression of strategy tactics of Reagan and colleagues, although further work can also be seen in this tradition, as more recent computation models have shown simple heuristics like fixate the largest word within a window of 20-letter spaces can indeed give a reasonable account of where aspects of eye movement control. Similarly, further studies, you can see I'm skipping words even just to be able to read it faster, like names, that it could be worth memorizing if I get more in detail and I care about the names and the scientists who did these studies and I want to commit it to memory. I would say their names out loud, but for now I'm more interested in the information. So I'm even skipping reading some of these parts. Proposed that the eyes are primarily guided by a basic visual heuristic. However, a model restricted the low-level oculomotor control plainly failed to handle the complexities of temporal control. With the benefit of hindsight, this controversy can be seen as little more than a question of emphasis. The two different approaches in reality define the extremes of continuum, and it is likely that any successful model will have to accommodate both cognitive, attentional, and visual oculomotor aspects. These studies acknowledge the limitations of the exclusively low-level view and suggest that a successful theory will need to combine elements of both tradition, while certainly giving precedence to the role of lexical processing, acknowledge the part played by visual motor factors in arguing for some kind of hybrid model. It may be more productive to view these eye movement patterns, which are determined by purely visual motor processes, as providing a carrier signal, which can be modulated by cognitive influences. Study 98 presented the final realistic algorithmic attention shift model of eye movement control and reading in the form of the easy reader model. Although undeniably in the attention shift tradition, its latest instantiation also draws to some extent on low-level oculomotor control processes. The model has been used to fit the corpus of reading data obtained by 98 and successfully accounts for a wide range of effects, including variation in viewing time as a function of word frequency, the effects of predictability, short duration fixations, word skipping, and spillover effects. Overall, the easy reader model has set a standard against which alternative models will have to be evaluated. Critical discussion of attention-based sequential control models has taken two main routes. The first points to evidence that more than one word may be processed in parallel rather than in strict sequential fashion. While the parafoveal preview effect is entirely consistent with the operation of sequential control model, properties of a word in the parafoveal should not influence concurrent foveal processing, and demonstrates that they do are clearly embarrassing. The research agenda has now shifted from focus on whether such parallel processing occurs to determining its precise nature, and in particular whether such processing crosstalk is restricted by sublexical properties. The second source of critical debate has centered on the question as to whether properties of the sequential model, such as lexical processing, attention shifts, and Saccadic program can plausibly operate in a serial manner, given the temporal constraints outlined above. For example, for a word to be skipped, the following sequence of events need to occur before any decision to modify the ongoing Saccadic program can be made. Complex lexical processing of the concrete word, a shifted attention to the to-be-skipped word, initial lexical processing, at least, of the newly added attended word. This may take place under certain, rather unusual circumstances, but doubts can be raised as to whether such process could plausibly be the default mechanism responsible for all cases of word skipping. In response to such criticism, a number of alternative models have been developed. The Swift model. Okay, issues for the future. 35 years ago, here this paper is in 2004. It's talking about the continuation of fruitful streams of empirical work, some of which will be discussed in detail below. So here are methodological problems, how to research this, grounding research on basic visual motive function, rich literature on saccade generation and traditional oculomotor physiology and systems theory, which have produced explicit and virtually complete theoretical frameworks and models. Neurobiologic evidence has recently been reviewed and provided a detailed discussion of formal biophysical saccadic control methods. Given this background of affairs, it is odd that experimental reading research has remained largely disconnected from the neurobiological relevant, either the visual processing or the oculomotor control. Recent attempt to remedy this situation can be found who seek to relate current evidence for neuroscience to the framework of the easy reader model. However, there are still lively debates on the identification of brain areas responsible for even the most aspects of processes. Similar problems, attempts to link relevant aspects of fundamental research and perception to eye movement controls in reading. Your systematic approach to the problem relating eye movement and reading to basic research on visual motor functions. So in this 2004, we're going to see later research on this, but this was a major paper. Integration with work on single word recognition. During the last 2 decades, eye movement research has contributed greatly to our understanding of how words are processed, but in many respects, eye movement measurements have been seen primarily as a powerful addition to existing chronometric methods. For example, improving our understanding of the role played by phonology and visual word recognition, morphological effects in complex word processing, the role played by neighborhood and spelling to sound regularity effects. Nevertheless, the relationship between the well-established tradition of work on single word processing and cognitive psychology and equivalent work on word processing and fluent reading has remained wary and uncertain. 2 subfields of reading research have maintained the state of more or less peaceful coexistence rather than productive cooperation. This is not to say there has been no interaction, but research questions, hypotheses, theoretical ideas typically have been transferred from the area of word recognition to the field of research on continuous reading, with virtually no examples of transfer in the opposite direction. We can try to wrap up. Math is over 2 hours. There's a lot to this. So in a comparison of models, we get to the conclusion. There's a lot of information here, and I got more data to cover. I'm glad I still got 5 people watching. You're seeing when I read out loud and I'm seeing the eye, so my eye works quicker than my mouth and my mind and the processing. So, I could say different words that are in the text. I could do that subconsciously, or I could consciously do it. And these are all interesting factors to understanding cognition. And, time is limited. Here is a longer study. Recent eye movement and reading information. This is also 1998. Information process, 20 years of research. Rayner, 1998. Recent in this one's 51 pages. I'm not going to look at most of it like the other one. Recent studies of eye movement and reading and other information processing tasks such as music, reading, typing, visual search, and scene perceptions are reviewed. The major emphasis on review is on reading a specific example of cognitive processing. Basic topics discussed with respects to reading are characteristics of eye movements, perceptual span, integration of information across saccades, eye movement control, individual references, including dyslexia. Similar topics are discussed with respect to other tasks examined. The basic theme of the review is that eye movement data reflects moment-to-moment cognitive processes in the various tasks examined. Theoretical and practical considerations concerning the use of eye movement data are discussed. So, saying we don't even understand cognition. Relatively till today, you're going to see that we don't even have a proper understanding of how the brain processes language. That's still a matter of much debate. You can see these studies. This paper is 98. Still a lot of these are main studies in the field. I have some more recent studies. And there's this, like there's a lot to this, and it relates to face perception, mathematics, spatial recognition, spatial patterns. It could be athletics, baseball, um, all different type things. And so the study of eye movement is extremely valuable to these different type fields. Not just reading. And I would like to understand these things more. I see I'm dropping off only 4 people watching because this is very complicated stuff. And here's 2013, and a lot of this relates more. I do want to get more into consciousness. So if people are regularly following me and interested in what I'm talking about, my desire is to get more into consciousness. I put out the first hour where basically overview of speed reading, just the techniques. And even if someone only watched like 15 minutes of that, the overview of the technique of speed reading, I believe people could start improving their speed reading. And for a more scientific understanding for those who are more into it. And so I'm going to have this one last study on saccadic and smooth pursuit eye movements during reading and drifting of text. And there's still a lot of research. This is still a hot topic of research. And as my debate with JF on evolution, the hard problem of consciousness has not been solved, and it may not be solved. Saying that we might not solve this hard problem of consciousness. Like I said, I do believe it came from the soul, and I appreciate you. Even though we might disagree on a lot of topics, Insane Hermit, we do agree on the soul and the brain being a receptor for spiritual elements. And so I doubt science is really going to answer that, although I do believe in science, and obviously the brain is a sense receptor. A sense perception is processed through the brain. Like I took anatomy. I know lots of doctors, and obviously, like the ear performs a Fourier transform. That's been clearly demonstrated that the mechanism of the ear is a device that translates airwaves into a Fourier transform and process that into electrical signals that enter the brain. Although I do believe cognition takes place on a spiritual plane. But but these concepts of speed reading is probably related to the saccadic and smooth pursuit of eye movement. And so even to someone who does believe in the soul, I'll learn from atheists to understand what's going on. So let's look at this more recent review, 2013, of saccadic and smooth pursuit eye movement during reading and drifting texts. Abstract reading is a complex visual motor behavior characterized by an alternation of fixation and saccadic eye movements. Despite the widespread use of drifting text in various settings, very little is known about eye movements under these conditions. Here we investigate oculomotor behavior during reading of text which were drifted horizontally or vertically at different speeds. Consistent with previous reports, drifting texts were read by an alternation of smooth pursuit and saccadic eye movements. Detailed analysis revealed several interactions between smooth pursuit and ciccadas. On one side, the gain of smooth pursuit was increased after the execution of a ciccada. On the other side, the peak velocity of ciccadas was reduced from the horizontally drifting text, in which ciccadas in pursuit were executed in opposite directions. In addition, we showed that well-known findings from the reading of static text extend to drifting text, such as the preferred viewing location, the inverted optimal viewing position, and the correlation between cicada amplitude and subsequent pursuit fixation duration. In general, individual eye movement parameters such as cicada amplitude and fixation pursuit durations were correlated across self-paced reading and static text and time-constrained reading of static and drifting text. These results show that the findings from basic oculomotor research also apply to reading of drifting text. Similarly, basic reading principles apply to the reading of static and drifting text in similar ways. This exemplifies the reading of drifting text to a visual motor behavior which is influenced by low-level eye movement control as well as cognitive and linguistic processing. So, reading is complex visual motor behavior in which eye movement exploits the strength and compensate for the limitations of the human visual systems due to decline in spatial acuity and crowding of the retinal periphery. The text is scanned by alternations of flexations and saccadic eye movements. Information uptake mainly happens during fixations of the fovea, and saccadic move to the fovea from one position in the text to the next. Several oculomotor processes like saccadic amplitudes and fixation durations are driven partially by the cognitive processing of the text. Humans are capable of reading drifting text, which is often used in situations where display space is limited, like mobile devices, advertisements, information panels. There have been several applied studies investigating reading speed and word comprehensions for different presentation methods of drifting text. Moreover, drifting text has been suggested as a tool to improve reading in people with dyslexia, visual impairments. Compared to these applied in clinical studies, there is very little oculomotor research on the reading of drifting text. So, this is interesting. We're looking, to look at this, and this is an actual study with a method where they looked at like reading from a screen and moving text, and it's related to how the brain processes and having good eyesight. Here's some figures of duration time for stationary versus drifting. It was drifting, it took a longer duration time. Different text speeds, correlations. So, it's an important scientific paper, and I just want to get into I want to understand cognition. I want to improve my speed reading. This is important. If people are watching and they're more intellectual, I hope they'll be able to read this, and I did want to include this. Look at the discussion real quick. The study investigates saccadic and smooth pursuit eye movement and their interaction during the reading of drifting text. As a comparison, we use self-paced reading of static text and static tests for which the line length and presentation rates were adjusted to impose similar reading speeds as per drifting text. Text motion was either horizontal or vertical. Our results show that well-known low-level oculomotor phenomena such as post-saccadic pursuit enhancement that have been observed with simple laboratory stimuli also apply to the more complex situation of reading drifting text. Moreover, classical eye movement patterns in normal reading, such as the correlation between saccadic amplitude and subsequent fixation duration, the preferred viewing location, and inverted optimal viewing positions also transferred to the reading of drifting text. So smooth pursuit eye movements, consistent with previous studies on the reading of drifting text, we found that fixations during normal reading were replaced by smooth pursuit eye movements. For horizontal drifting text, fixation pursuit durations were increased by about 10 to 15 microseconds compared to the static condition. The increase in pursuit duration might indicate that more time was necessary to recognize words when the text was drifting horizontally. For vertically drifting text, fixation pursuit durations were mainly affected by the line length and did not differ between the static and drifting conditions. More importantly, fixation pursuit durations for individual observers were highly correlated with the self-paced pre-tests and the experimental conditions for both horizontal and vertical drifting text. This means that individual reading patterns were similar for static and drifting text, and their experimental conditions did not destroy these individual patterns. The gain of smooth pursuit varied overall between 0.9 and 1.1. This means that the retinal speed of the text varied between, depending on the pursuit gain of speed. So interesting, pursuit gain was increased by 8.5% after the execution of a saccade. Such post-saccadic pursuit enhancement has been observed previously during pursuit initiation in response to a specific target. Our results suggest that this post-saccadic pursuit enhancement occurred also during steady-state pursuit of when a more complex stimuli is tracked. A reported enhanced motion sensitivity an area MT after the execution of saccade suggests that saccades increase the gain of motion processed in general. Surprisingly, post-saccadic pursuit gain even exceeded unity in some conditions, meaning that the eyes were moving faster than the text itself. It might be that post-saccadic pursuit compensates small position errors after the execution of saccades. For vertically drifting text, pursuit gain was lowered for faster motion. Since all text speeds were very much lower than the upper limit of smooth pursuit, it is unlikely that reduced gain from the faster motion is caused by a saturation of eye velocity. Alternatively, the difference in pursuit gain might be caused by the range of tested speeds, such that the pursuit gain was increased for the lower speeds and decreased for the faster speeds. However, the different speeds and directions were presented in separate books, so the potential rain effect could have affected pursuit gain only across blocks. So more details. Hopefully other people will have time to read this more, so now I'm just skimming. Conclusions: we have shown that the reading of drifting text is accomplished by an alternation of smooth and saccadic eye movements. These eye movements are not executed in isolations, but interact with each other. Pursuit gain is increased after the execution of saccade, and the amplitude of the preceding saccade determines the duration of the following pursuit episode, just like the reading of static text. The peak velocity of saccade is reduced for horizontal drifting text, as expected by a simple summation of smooth pursuit and saccades, the preferred viewing location, and the inverted optimal viewing position, and the shifted to the right for horizontally drifting text, but are very similar for vertically drifting and static text. Awesome. Only 2 people down. Very complicated stuff. I can understand no one really wants to join me in this, but people might come later or have insight on it. And I got one last study I'm going to go through. Yeah, I appreciate you correcting me there. And as I said, like if it was something that I'd studied before, I could speed read it. Like I said in the beginning of the technique, you have to have the frame of reference to be able to switch this stuff from short-term memory to long-term memory. And so this is relatively new to me. I hardly even knew what a saccade was before I looked into this today. So, I do want to increase my speed reading and do want to create an intellectual forum for people who know about this. So, I didn't just want to show the overview of speed reading techniques, but I wanted to show you the most relevant scientific studies on what is actually happening during speed reading. And so I got one final thing that I showed before on spaced repetition for learning, because I said memory is one of the key things to speed reading. So a nice, little overview of spaced repetition for building up memory, which is directly related to speed reading. I encourage people to read it. We talk about cramming and talk about massing together. The more things are massed together, the more you'll see apparent benefits on the short term. The more they're spread out, the more you'll see benefits in the long term. It is possible to space too much in some ways. That is just intuitive. If I let extraordinary time go between when I first study something and when I restudy it, it'll be almost like that restudy is the first time. There is an optimal spacing interval. It tends to be very long, but there's a peak that performance, as I increase that spacing, performance will increase a lot to some point, and then I gradually get too much space. So there's been over 1,000 studies on this. There's links to the studies on it about spacing, and I showed this chart earlier about the recall chart of when you just study something once, then you have a 90% chance of forgetting, over like a 97% chance of forgetting it in 2 months, versus if you review it once shortly after in the next few days, you have a 50% chance of remembering it 2 months later, and a third review, an 80% chance of reviewing it. And, going on to if you space review out over a few months, over a period of a year, um, you're likely to have a good chance of remembering it the rest of your life. So, mainly it was that one chart I wanted to. I think I'm even going to make this. I think I'm even going to make this chart the video. When I do add the video, I'm going to make this chart the picture for the video. And I don't know if any of you know German. So I found this one, the Schnell-Lesse Technique for speed reading, and it's pretty modern, scientific based, out of German. And so these slides, I couldn't really find anything good about it in English. So if any of you are familiar with your German, I'm going to go through these slides. At least you'll see some good graphics, some of it in English, or you make a little bit out of my little knowledge of German. So here they're claiming that the Schnell-Lesse technique could get you as high as 2,400 words per minute. We talk about scanning, skimming, the rotting process, learning, memorizing. So like memorizing what I was doing, about 138 words per minute when I was reading that earlier, learning different understandings. So even if you don't understand German, these visuals were very good and worth looking through. So here's a relationship to IQ tests and comprehension test score, and we're seeing that cutoff of around an IQ of about 120 for comprehension. So people with low IQs have a harder time comprehending words. A certain cutoff, like hockey stick chart. Or this for rotting. Sorry, that wasn't IQ. That was rotting. Die Ratenrate ist individual Verschieden, unabhängig von cognitive speed. Personen mit einer Ratenrate über 600 Wort per minute gibt es nicht. Others sind extreme selten. So it's saying past a certain amount of 600 words per minute, that the evidence shows, like we said earlier, that the studies have shown speed reading effective up to about 600 words per minute, and then comprehension can't get much higher. A comprehension dropping off, that at over 600 words per minute, comprehension starts dropping off rapidly. And once you get over like 1,200 words per minute, comprehension goes to almost zero. But then you could look in the other techniques we've been mentioning. So here they're showing the chart for the comprehension rate dropping off from over 600 words per minute. I'm not sure if anyone's in the chat, if everyone left. Yeah. I mean, this is in German, but it is important, so I do want to cover it. This is my last thing I'm going to cover. So I can't explain much, and my German is pretty weak, I guess. I could make out a few words. Here we have that same diagram earlier that we had in the earlier test about chunking and fixation times. Here we have nice diagrams for this peripheral vision. What we're talking about, the foveal and parafoveal. And I'm sorry, the best thing I could find on this was actually in German, so I'm using the German because these are very good visuals of what we were talking about, the foveal, parafoveal, peripheral. And within the studies will show the best comprehension, that foveal range, and the extreme decrease as you get further out in peripheral vision of comprehension level. Concepts about fixation point, angle, nice graphs for people who are listening to the saccade movements. That I wanted to show these visuals, even though it's in German. So the example of the blurriness of when you look at the four in the center and the stuff on the side, although you might be able to make out like the whole sentence by the blurriness. And here's a percent, like 100% of the center, and it's down to about 25% of the side, 75% for the word or two immediately to the right or left. You look like the cicada trying to find the center of the word where your eye centers to. So I mean, if you are looking at the science of speed reading, and if it's a accuracy of your eye in terms of milliseconds, exact amount of time that you need to process and hitting the exact right point in the middle of the word, and that's what's allowing someone to process speeds quicker. And here we have the chart of that we had seen earlier of fixation duration versus age, and the amount of time that people spend as children dropping off to the milliseconds to when you first start reading to in college, and eventually, like even in high school or middle school, you might already fully develop this reading capacity. You have the difference between line fixation, regressive and regressive fixations. And you have your numerical studies of what we just numerical showing what we just showed. Same chart we had earlier. So here we show, is it possible to get to like 10,000 words per minute? And, there are some evidence and there has been some studies on super performers and even up to 6,000 words per minute. But, there has been reasonable studies that people can actually have reasonable success at 2,000 or 3,000 words per minute. That's why I'm showing this in German, because some of the best information, I guess, about this is coming from Germany. And as I read earlier, one of the reports was from Germany and, published in English. Further charts like related to the chunking and fixation. These visuals hopefully are useful. And we have like the circular movement for trying to speed read. So I mean, here was the zigzag method, and here's the circular method. And even this is showing circular method for people even claiming to get 2,400 words per minute or up to 6,000 words per minute. So we're looking at like the peripheral. So using the circular method where for people who are more in depth in speed reading, that's why I'm showing this in German. Unfortunately, this is the best information I could find. And my German is very weak, but this is the best information out there. That's why I'm showing you in German. And so you look into the eye fixation versus the peripheral vision, what you could possibly get, and the idea of the circle method, if any of you are speed readers. And the same ideas would apply to general visual perception, not just reading. There's the more circular versus crisscross method. There's studies on these where actually this circular method, people have been tested as fast 1,500 to 6,000 words per minute, as where this like crisscross with a loop at the end, actually, following eye movements, people have been tested as high as 10,000 words per minute. And so, I mean, these are tests on skilled rapid readers. So I said in the other test I didn't have, so in Germany, they've had better studies on these skilled rapid readers. And here you have comprehension, reading speed, words per minute versus comprehension. And here you have skilled rapid readers versus informed readers or uninformed readers. So there's been tests of people having 80% comprehension at up to 1,600 words per minute. And there's even been tests of people having over 50% comprehension. It is up to as much as 3,000 words per minute. So there has been statistical test data that has demonstrated that people have been able to have over 50% comprehension at as much as 3,000 words per minute, and 80% comprehension at 1,500 words per minute, where I claimed I could read about 1,000 words per minute, but it said that depends on what I'm reading. And so here you have, your skilled readers that you still have this curve of decrease. So you have this decrease curve showing as people go over 600 words per minute, they start decreasing in comprehension. And then you have the different skilled readers who are outliers to this. And your specific Kim Peek, who had 98% retention at 2,000 to 2,500 words per minute in a test. Romilly Cocking, a person who had 80% understanding at 1,500 to 1,800 words per minute. And Peter Rosler, who is the person doing the study, who is part of the Schnell-Lesse technique of speed reading, has been tested to have 50% accuracy at 1,800 words per minute, as opposed to the test that we showed earlier. So I was saying there are truly outliers who have been tested to scientifically to demonstrate the ability to read extremely quick with large percent amounts of comprehension. And obviously, Peter Rosler, who's an expert in the field and has these Schnell-Lesse method for speed reading, has himself subjected himself to these tests. The same hockey puck, the rotting speed, which we mentioned, this kind of like technique of rotting. And here's a study with time technique. Let me see if I got 3 people watching. I'm glad some people are sticking around. I don't know if anyone knows German, but this is really interesting. So here, here's someone that was studied the technique, and their the effective reading rate is based on their comprehension. So before learning it, they were reading at about 200 some words per minute, and they were comprehending the majority of it, like 90%. Then they got up to 600 words per minute, but were only comprehending about 30% of what they were reading. And after 2 months, they were comprehending close to effective reading rate of 400 words per minute, and they slowly slowed down the reading and got their effective reading rate over 400. So this is pretty common in testing, that speed reading, you can get your reading and comprehension rate up to the technique has been proven. Speed reading, as we said, up to about 600 words per minute has been shown scientifically. Okay, this is a nice overview. I wish I had found something like this in English. Unfortunately, this was the best thing I could find in German, and but it was worth it just to see those visuals and some of the studies of the outliers. So I got 4 people watching. I appreciate you watching. I got 0 dislikes on this one. Great. This shouldn't be controversial. I hope everybody could gain from the speed reading techniques. And, God bless. Shalom to everybody. And I'm going to stop it here. I might even do an Ask the Rabbi later tonight on anti-Semitism. I mean, Zionism and anti-Zionism, because a lot of people have been asking me about the Zionism and anti-Zionism. So depending on what happens later tonight, it's conceivable I'll even be streaming in like 2 hours and presenting, like doing Ask the Rabbi, be open forum, people could ask questions and even come on, and I'll do a quick presentation on Zionism and anti-Zionism from the Jewish framework.